that's a layup. Temptation couldn't even phase them. 40 days and nights and still proclaiming the kingdom. Back by the king of kings, little loves. Every time we get involved, it's a dub. By the fall, ain't no drug. It ain't even close to love. Faith, 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 faith. Ain't even close to love. Faith, 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 favor. Tiptoeing with this faith of mine. Big stepper, yeah, yeah. Big stepper, big stepper, yeah. Back by the king of kings, little loves. Every time we get involved, it's a dub. By the fall, ain't no drug. It ain't even close, oh Lord. It ain't even close. It ain't even close, oh Lord. It ain't even close. All praise to the Most High. It ain't even close. It ain't even close. It ain't even close. No.
Sir, we have an executive order ordering the declassification of files relating to the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
That's a big one, huh? A lot of people are waiting for this for years, and everything will be revealed. Give that to RFK Jr.
Yes, sir.
Martin Luther King Jr., Bobby Kennedy, and JFK, all left-wing heroes. Did some nefarious group, whether they're inside or outside the government, kill all of our left-wing heroes? If you're on the left wing, you should be ecstatic about this, no matter where it comes from.
Let me explain to y'all what's about to happen. In 5 or 6 years, the FBI so-called recordings of Dr. King were set to be released. Those will now be released. The FBI, who I simply do not believe, claims that Dr. King, they have recordings of Dr. King having affairs, involved in orgies. They claim that he was with a white prostitute in Las Vegas. And these were all notes. David Garrow wrote a story. No American media entity would run the story. So he went to a small outlet overseas. And there were the notes. And these notes were a part of the JFK papers at the Library of Congress or National Archives. And so he wrote a story based upon the notes. Let me explain to you why they doing this here. I just want y'all to understand what's about to come down. They are going to try to completely destroy the legacy of Dr. King. I guarantee you, when these papers are released and you get the recordings and all the stuff from the FBI, people are gonna say, take his name off of streets, take his name off of elementary schools. We should not have programs honoring him. We should not have scholarship programs. He was not a moral man. I'm telling y'all, don't think for a second that this executive order signed by Trump, is all about, let's just get at the truth of what happens. I'm telling y'all right now, and let me just be on record right now, in advance of whatever is released. And I'm just gonna say this here, and I remember, and I'm gonna quote my dear alpha brother, Andrew Young, when I asked him this question. I think we actually got it on tape as well in the interview that I did with him in Atlanta, when I asked him about this very thing, and he said, fuck them. Listen to me clearly. Anything that is released related to the private life of Dr. King, who was not a perfect man, no man or woman is perfect. Anything released from the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover and his COINTEL program is full of shit. They tried to get King to kill himself. They doctored tapes. They sent stuff to Coretta Scott King. I absolutely believe nothing absolutely nothing that comes from this FBI as it relates to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and J. Edgar Hoover's name shouldn't even be on the FBI building here in Washington, D.C. because he was a racist, corrupt, evil son of a bitch. And that should be the reaction every Black America gives when anything comes out about Dr. King released from this federal government and from this FBI.
I think John Hoover's name should be on the building because the FBI is a criminal enterprise. I don't think that for the same reasons that the MAGA people think it. I think that it's a criminal enterprise because as a person of African descent, it has never done anything other than attack and persecute and prosecute us. I'm glad to see Leonard Peltier home after decades, but Assata Shakur still can't come back. And so, but that having been said, what you have just said, folk, listen to everything tonight, but listen very carefully to this. We need to brace for this because, I think about some of the most brilliant thinkers, theologians we have, everybody from Jeremiah Wright to Vashti McKenzie, and, that world is a world that is populated by human beings. And we often hold our people to standards that other people don't. And I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I'm saying that we don't allow our people to be human. And Dr. King didn't make it 40 years old. And I'm glad you evoked David Garrow. David Garrow is a first-class researcher. He's done so much important work. Anybody get his book, Rising Sun, on Barack Obama, you won't look at Obama the same. It always cracks me up when people say, I'm critical of Obama. People opening their mouths and have never read one word of one sentence, one paragraph, or one page of anything about Barack Obama. You read David Garrow, you look at the whole world differently. And even Jonathan Ives' recent book on King came out a couple of summers ago, but it doesn't displace what Martin Luther King did. Unlike the young girl lover Matt Gaetz, unlike the convicted sexual predator Donald Trump, unlike damn near the whole Republican Party, Dr. King gave his life for everybody, regardless of color. And so I'll just end with this, and I just want to underscore what you said, Roland, and really, really, really support what you said, every word of it. And please, people, when these tapes are revealed, and they're only revealed because they want to take who they think is the champion, the central figure representing the moral standard of African people, which is the only reason there is a funky criminal enterprise called the United States of America. Let's be very clear about that. And I don't think that it's going to take a century to claw back, because I don't think the United States is going to be here in a century, not in the current form, not in its current form. I think it's inevitable. That's why they're pulling out the stops. Now, Steve Bannon is very clear about this, and I join him shoulder to shoulder and say, you're absolutely right, Mr. Bannon. Y'all don't have another play but this. This is the only play you have, and it's going to fail. It's going to fail. Anytime the damn ADL is supporting Elon Musk, who is openly supporting the AfD in Germany, a damn neo-Nazi party, it's very clear that everybody going for themselves. So guess what? We are too. But when they come for Dr. King and the way they're going to come for Dr. King, any one of you Negroes that runs out and talking about taking down a statue or rejecting Martin Luther King, I want you to keep that same energy for every one of these sexually frustrated, late at night punk deviants who are running this government and running industry. Because if you think you can measure Martin Luther King by a standard and not measure them by the standard, then you are betraying not only our people, you're betraying your own humanity.
Okay, so as many of you know, just a few days ago, Trump signed an executive order which orders the release of the MLK files along with the RFK files and the JFK files. Now, I've been getting a lot of questions and comments and DMs from some of you because I myself have been sounding the alarm on who MLK really was for quite some time now. Now, one of the questions that I often get is, Chad, why do you continually sound the alarm? What do you get out of it? What is to be gained? What is it that you want out of Americans knowing who MLK really was? Namely that he was a communist, he was a philanderer, he wasn't a real pastor, so on and so forth. What do you get out of it? What's to gain? Well, I think of it this way. I think of it like investing. I think that's the best analogy I could possibly think of. An investor makes decisions on what they will or won't invest in based on the information they have. They either get good information or bad information. Now, to the extent that they get good information, they get to capitalize on the benefits of what they gain from making a good investment. On the other hand, when you receive bad information, and therefore make a bad investment. Not only do you get to not reap the benefits of what you thought you'd gain, you lose what it was you've invested to begin with. When it comes to the education that many of us received in America's public schools, we just received bad information, especially as it pertains to Martin Luther King Jr. We weren't told the truth about what he really did and who he really was, or what the civil rights movement was really about. It was a Marxist movement which the government used to expand its own power. That's what it really was. And to the extent that we are taught to glorify him or put him on this pedestal, the government is the one that actually stands to benefit from his legacy, from his martyrdom. You'll notice that anytime they are trying to push some policy which will only stand to expand the role of the federal government, they will invoke the name of none other than Martin Luther King Jr.
As Martin Luther King once said,
Martin Luther King,
he marched to change attitudes. It's about time we change our attitude and we begin to change the attitudes of Americans about what their responsibilities are to the poor.
And I remember standing on this floor managing the Martin Luther King holiday bill. We had the majority. We worked together on food stamps and the WIC program and the school lunch program.
There was a man named Martin Luther King who talked to people who were losing faith in America that we can be who we say we are. Well, today, America is witnessing the literal bending of the arc.
Indeed, they're asking you to invest with your votes and your allegiance into the future that they are building, which may sound good from the surface, but in reality is a deviation from our founding principles, advancing globalism at the expense of genuine individual liberty. And so we will be elaborating on this more in a documentary that I'm coming out with. And by the way, should we call it Motives Unmasked or the MLK Project? Let's put that to a vote and see. But we'll be answering the question of why is it important to really understand who Martin Luther King was and what he was really about, along with other questions in our documentary. The first issue or misconception that we're going to cover, this is a question or a comment that I get often, is that blacks are free today because of the efforts and sacrifice of Martin Luther King. That's completely false, and we'll explain why in the film, namely the fact that race relations between blacks and whites was actually improving well before Martin Luther King ever stepped onto the scene. There's evidence of this as early as the late 1800s, going all the way up to 1954, before the Brown v. Board of Education decision. You see the shedding of so-called Jim Crow laws and ordinances at the private level as well as the local level all across the South. And the fact is, had things continued in this direction, you would have gotten the dual benefit of improved race relations and the shedding of Jim Crow on the one hand, and a maintaining of a small government system on the other hand. Instead, what we ended up getting, because of communist agitation, infiltration, and instigation in the 1910s, 20s, 30s, all the way up until the day of Martin Luther King and continuing on even from there, is this facade, this kind of illusion of improved race relations, which really isn't improved at all, especially considering the fact that here recently we had this guy, Mike Jenkins, I think is his name, bullying this woman, Michelle Bishop, over a misunderstanding. This is the kind of thing that you get as a legacy of the so-called civil rights movement. So you get that on the one hand and an expanded federal government on the other hand. That's the true legacy of the civil rights movement. So we'll be fleshing that out more. Another misconception we're going to be covering is this notion that Martin Luther King believed truly in the edicts of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. No, he didn't. That's not a true thing that happened. Truly, Martin Luther King co-opted the sentiments and the rhetoric of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, not for the sake of getting back to the edicts of those documents, but rather for subverting those documents to push a communist agenda. We're going to be explaining that more. On that note, we're going to be addressing this notion that Martin Luther King believed truly in the gospel. Once again, he didn't truly believe in the gospel. He sought to co-opt the gospel because the Negro church, the black church, especially in the South, had a captive audience already. It had a long tradition of gathering within the church already. And so the communists sought to exploit that gathering, to subvert that gathering, to redirect it from the cross to Marxism. That's what Martin Luther King was a part of. We'll be explaining that more in the film. Another misconception was that Martin Luther King, quote, did a lot of good things, unquote, including the I Have a Dream speech. When people tell me that Martin Luther King did a lot of good things, I always ask, well, name one of them. Name one of the good things that Martin Luther King did, and they can't give me a thing that Martin Luther King did that was good. The reality is that most people are operating from an education that they got a long time ago, where they were literally indoctrinated to love the civil rights movement, to look almost worshipfully at Martin Luther King, and that's what they're operating on. They are basically reacting to stimuli. They haven't actually researched the issue themselves to determine whether this is someone who's worth worshiping or not. And so as such, they are just trained to say, Martin Luther King, good. He did a lot of good things. And then too, when it comes to the I Have a Dream speech, he didn't even write the speech. It was written by his communist handlers. We're going to be fleshing that out in the film. Another issue is that Martin Luther King was a moral leader. How could that be true when you're constantly cheating on your wife, among other things? We're going to get into that. Another one that we're going to cover, and this is one that always gets me. You see people saying Martin Luther King is vindicated by the fact that he admitted to, quote, integrating his people into a burning house, unquote. Actually, no, that doesn't vindicate Martin Luther King at all. And what you think he was trying to say wasn't what he was actually trying to say. I can't wait for people to watch that scene in the documentary. Another is, regardless, it is still necessary to celebrate MLK as a symbol of unity. No, it's not. It's not, especially if you consider yourself a Christian. Look to Christ as a symbol of unity. He's the one that said you are to love your neighbor as yourself. He's the one that said do unto others as you would have them do unto you. He is the one who is the God of common grace, letting the rain fall on the righteous as well as the unrighteous, and letting the sun rise on the just as well as the unjust. And so we know that Christ is a symbol of unity. We don't need this man, Martin Luther King, who is deeply flawed. And speaking of which, that leads me to the other one we're going to address, which is nobody is perfect. Well, here's the problem with that. We're not talking about whether someone is perfect or not. We're talking about a person who was a deceiver, who intentionally and willfully tried to deceive people by being a quote-unquote pastor, knowing full well he did not believe that Jesus rose from the dead. He didn't believe in the literal existence of heaven or hell. He didn't believe in the second coming of Christ. All of the things that make a Christian, Martin Luther King himself did not believe, and he admitted as much. And so that's one of those things that I think is necessary to address. And then last but not least, we're going to address, why was he assassinated? That's a big one that I think a lot of people are going to want to see. So anyway, this documentary is going to be released in April, and it's completely independent, as all of my work is. And so if you're interested in helping us fund or contribute to this work, do comment fund, F-U-N-D, in the comment section, and we'll make sure you get a link. In the meantime, God bless you, and thank you for your support.
Hello, everyone. It is good to be back with you. It looks like this lag demon is on me right now. Hopefully it'll pick up soon. But I am glad to be back with you guys. We have a great episode here for you. I am going to start out with just just one thing that I want to say about the opening monologue. People like Roland Martin, they don't want the truth of Martin Luther King to be told, not because they're afraid of, the statues that they're going to tear down or might tear down or whatever. He don't want his check to be messed with because he's a grifter. That's why he doesn't want the truth about Martin Luther King to be told, because all of these people, the Al Sharptons, the Roland Martins, I wish my thing was acting right, but all of those people like that, they are grifting and they don't want their money to be messed with. So while I get myself together, let's go ahead and bring up the best show, the best co-host on the internet, Mr. Chado Jackson, Mr. Teach 'em Chuck, and Mr. Free Blanche. He is Blanche Robinson. Hello, gentlemen. Hello.
Hey, how are you, Quisha?
I'm good. I'm gonna duck off for a second, refresh, and come right back because my thing is acting up.
Do your thing. Do your thing. All right. So, as many of you know, Trump signed an executive order a few days ago, initiating the release of the files on MLK, the assassination of MLK, RFK, and JFK. And I think there's some confusion out there. A lot of people think that the files were released the moment he signed the document, but that's not so. What the signing of the order did is it gave the government 45 days to come up with a plan that they would bring to Trump's office to determine how exactly are we going to go about getting these files out. So my hope is that after that 45 days, they'll be released. My hope is that, you know, they don't come to Trump's desk and say, hey, okay, so let's roll it out slowly over the course of the next 3 or 4 years. We'll see what happens, but there are files, I think 26 or 27 some odd pages that have been released over the course of the last 20 years, I think it was. Those files resurfaced on Twitter and IG. I know I shared 3 pages or 3 excerpts, I should say. This is information that's been public knowledge for a long time. It's been public knowledge, but still it's been kind of underground insofar that most people don't know. Most people aren't aware because from the time they step foot into a public school, they are indoctrinated with this mythologized side of MLK and of the civil rights movement, and that's what they get in so-called free education, to where by the time they are old enough to comprehend things and reason, this information of who MLK really was, you kind of have to search for it, quite frankly, or you have to care. And by the time people got their education, they don't care anymore, and they just kind of go with what they've been indoctrinated to believe. And so that's kind of unfortunate. So yeah, we'll see what happens. But the files, the files that we will be talking about this evening, and the ones that you've seen online so far are not the new batch that was initiated by the executive order. So with that, I'll give it back to Quisha.
How did you because I was digging around, how did you did you just know that these weren't the original files, or that these weren't the files that Trump, how did you know that?
Yeah, because I read all these. I know Chuck's read all these before.
Mm-hmm.
This is information that's been out there for a while now.
Oh, okay. So. And where should we go when they, is it going to be on like the archive.gov, or is it going to be, is that where they put that stuff? Okay. Yeah. All right. So we'll be on the lookout. Oh, when do you think they will actually release it?
Like I said, they have 45 days from the time the order was signed to come up with a plan to release them. So that could mean anything. That could mean that they're still going to keep the date of the 27th, or sorry, 2027 intact. Mm-hmm. That could mean that it's going to be released after that 45 days. That could mean a whole slew of things. My hope is that Trump stays true to his word, because when he went on Rogan and on several occasions throughout the campaign trail, he did say that he's going to release it, and the insinuation is that it would be immediately. Right. So I'm hoping that this isn't just theatrics. I signed something, but then everything just kind of continues to go as it was already going in terms of 2027. We'll see the full extent of the files, but we'll see what happens.
So I did see, I think this was on Megyn Kelly. She was talking about how when Trump was talking about releasing files, he had said in his last term that basically, he wanted to do it, but I guess someone had kind of talked to him or whatever, and that maybe there might be some information missing. Like they kind of had time to kind of redact things that they still didn't want out.
Yeah, they certainly did that with the JFK files. I don't know about the RFK files or the MLK files, but there was someone who got in his ear and said, "Hey, we have to send this back to the committee and redact further information before we release this as the public. And as Trump tells it, the reason why is because there's still people who are alive, who are somehow involved or connected with the JFK assassination. I know Alex Jones has been talking about the JFK assassination for a number of years. In fact, he had the grandson of an oil tycoon who was connected with LBJ. And as he puts it, LBJ is the one who sent out the call to have JFK assassinated.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah. So anyway, apparently LBJ was well connected with the Texas Mafia, the oil mafia, and he had goons all up and down and throughout Texas. And when JFK came to Dallas, one thing led to another. But far be it from me to try to say definitively what happened, because I don't know, and we won't know until we release those files. And even after the files are released, I don't think that we will still truly know the full extent of everything that happened, especially if they're going to only release a redacted version of what they have on file.
Let me ask you, Blanche, what do you think? Have you read the ones that we have already? Uh-oh, wait, you're muted. Hold on. Okay. Oh, wait, never mind. Go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, I read about half of it. I went online looking yesterday and I figured out that they didn't have a release yet. But if you just put it in Google, it'll come up like maybe on the 5th line, the actual documents.
So what do you think, what do you predict that we will learn about MLK that we might not know?
Honestly, I don't think anything, because I think the issue is how much the truth is going to cause a problem, especially with a pivotal idol like MLK. So if you think about it, it probably causes more, I don't want to say more harm than good, but people aren't ready for the truth that we have out now about MLK. Could you imagine if there was some more stuff that said even more, like, so if you listen to Roland Martin and the great value Kwame Ture dude, if you listen to them, what they're basically saying is, don't judge his actual character, who he actually is, just base it off of what he quote unquote did for Black people, because they already know that he wasn't a moral person. I think that people are okay, especially Black folks, with him not being moral. But I think when you get into the intent behind him, it's one thing for him not to be an immoral individual, but it's another for him to be intentionally, trying to sabotage America, him intentionally be, being kind of like, so right now it's kind of like, okay, well, he might have been slow. They took advantage of him. He really wanted to help Black people. But if they can get to the nefarious side of King, like, no, this was actually orchestrated and it was intentional, and he's actually a bad person, I think that will cause a huge problem. So I don't think it's going to be too much more released, in my opinion. I don't know, but I don't think so.
Is that me? Okay. I'm not the one frozen this time.
No, yeah, I saw it too.
So Chuck, with everything that Blanche just said, like, people probably will not be ready for Martin Luther King. That information. My husband just walked into the room. Everybody say hi, husband.
What's up?
He done messed Chuck up. Tell him walk back out so Chuck can come back home.
Yeah, Chuck is frozen. Chuck, refresh, Chuck. Okay, I'll take him down until he gets that. Okay, well, I'll ask you, Chad. Okay, so with everything that we know and that we hope to learn, do you think that when Black Americans in particular learn of let's say that they do learn that they see that he was actually nefarious and actually trying to do things, do you think that it would sway them? Because I mean, my personal opinion is like, they'll hear that he was actually a communist and didn't really believe the gospel. I think they will try to justify it. Well, America needs to be torn down anyway. Like, he's still good. That's what I think that they'll do. I don't think some Black people will be ready to deal with the truth, even if it was just like they had a recording of him saying, "We're gonna get these niggas," you know, like I don't think that they would care. What do you think?
Well, I mean, so to answer your question, or I would just basically echo what Blanchard already said, which is that that when you look at Roland Martin and his guest there on his show, focusing not on his moral deficiencies, but rather what he quote unquote did, I think this will be the sentiment of most people. And it has already been the sentiment of of a lot of people, even with the stuff that I share on IG and YouTube and other social media platforms. You have a lot of people who are like, wow, I never knew this. Let me look into this, or wow, this changes everything. Mm-hmm. And then you have a lot of other people, well, who cares? Like, he still did a lot of good things. And I think like that is the mark of someone who is either honorable versus someone who isn't honorable. Mm. If you, upon receiving this kind of information, are genuine about, man, I never really knew this. This is interesting. Like, this is crazy. Let me pursue this further. I think that you have, okay, there's still hope for you. Like, there's still, at least you're open-handed to the truth, mm-hmm. and you're going to basically redirect or reorient your disposition to the truth, as opposed to ignoring the truth and just being cognitively dissonant. Whereas, you know, the person who says, no, this isn't real, like, he still did a lot of good things. These are people who still are trying to cling tight to the indoctrination and aren't willing to be open to the fact that maybe I was lied to, you know, and that's important to, you know, that's something that's important. Another thing that I'll say, and this was the last thing I'll say before I give it back to you all and try to figure out these technical difficulties with Truck, is that one of the biggest reasons why I don't think that there's going to be a correct response to this information is because of the moral decline that has taken place over the course of the past half century. Mm-hmm. Certainly since the 1960s. You'll remember that whenever E.D. Nixon was leading the Montgomery Improvement Association, and they were trying to cause an uprising with the bus boycott, he initially tried 2 girls, and none of them seemed to work. One of the girls, I think her name was Claudette or something like that. I forget her name. Correct?
Yeah.
I think it was Claudette.
Yeah.
She was a 15 or 16-year-old girl who was pregnant out of wedlock. And the consensus mm-hmm. with the committee was that, well, this won't work because, you know, she's pregnant out of wedlock. The Black community here in Montgomery are not going to galvanize or collectivize themselves around such a person. So because of this, Rosa Parks, who was an older woman who was dignified in the community, they chose her. She was a treasurer of the NAACP. Mm-hmm. And they were able to galvanize around her because she had some respectability about her. Yeah. Now, if this were today, that wouldn't be considered, whether this girl is, you know, pregnant out of wedlock or not. That's not a thing that would be considered. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a testament to the moral decline of the so-called Black community from the 1950s, because that happened in 1955, to today. Mm-hmm. Because we're so morally seared, because we have a morally seared conscience, not only as so-called Black Americans, but as Americans in general. Yeah. There's a lot of things that we let fly today. There's a lot of things that we tolerate today that we would not have tolerated in the 1950s. And so because that's where we are cognitively, because that's where we are morally, to the extent that we learn about the truth of MLK, I think that the moral threshold is so low that it's not going to warrant the correct response. because it's going to be like, well, who cares? Who among us is perfect?
Mm-hmm.
And this is why, you know, in the little video that I did, it's not about one's perfection. It's about the fact that this is a man who literally deceived and manipulated to push a nefarious agenda. That's what it's about. So anyway.
Yeah, very true. That's one of the things that bothers me so much about this when Chuck and I did that live, and he was the first one that really like gave me the tea on Martin Luther King. Y'all saw me in real time be like, what? Oh my God, it was so crazy. I look back at that video and I laugh at myself from time to time, but because I really was like, my mind was really blown. But so Chuck, so if you know, you've read the paper, the 23-page paper that we have, and it says in there that the reason that King was okay with Stanley Levinson is because he was already like a full-on Marxist, so he like welcomed it. I don't understand. To me, like Marxist, communist, socialist, fascist, like they all eventually, why do you think that the government like kind of separated the two like that? Or what is like, well, you understand the question, go ahead.
You mean like separating like socialist, communist, you know what I mean? Like
Marxists and communists. They're like, well, he accepted them because even though they're communists, well, he was a Marxist. So I'm like, well, what's the difference?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Marxism is it's like the philosophy. Pretty much Marx took communism with he and Engels with the publication of the Communist Manifesto, or the Communist Confession of Faith. It's funny too, just a quick little side note, a lot of the Communist Manifesto, or at least when it comes to, I think it was the 10-point plan, is funny because a lot of it was plagiarized by some unknown, unheralded a member of the Comintern at the time. There's an exchange between Engels and Marx where Engels tells Marx, hey, you know, another gentleman passed this information on to me, because Marx and Engels were given the task of creating this manifesto for the whole of the party. And they were sort of having like a writer's block, if you want to call it that. And someone offered this information, and they took this person's ideas and they just sort of reshaped it and took a couple words out here and there, and, you know, presented it to their faction, and they pretty much took the credit for another guy's work. But that's a side note. But Marx, a lot of people, you know, don't know, in fact, that are new to this information, that a lot of these radical socialist ideas began amongst a lot of French intellectuals. As a matter of fact, two in particular, one named Charles Fourier, and another sort of like a hero of the cause of radical revolution, a man by the name of Henri Saint-Simon. Well, Marx, you know, even though, you know, he kind of adopted a lot of these atheistic attitudes, and it's in you know, many experts on the life of Karl Marx are not exactly sure if Marx joined some sort of secret society that had, you know, perhaps some weird satanic or Luciferian beliefs. You can clearly see with his writings and corresponding letters, when he was writing letters back to his father, you can see the change in him and a lot of the language that he was using. But I say all that to say that, you know, Marx didn't invent communism. He merely adopted it, especially, you know, during his time in France, where he and his wife at that time had lived, is when he officially decided to join the ranks of the Communist Party, because, you know, he was pretty much, you know, looking for a cause, because the nihilism that was brought upon by his atheism sort of gave him a new mission, right? And so Marxism became like Karl Marx's own particular brand of a long line of socialist and utopian thinkers that had influenced him. And when he read the works of a lot of, you can call them heterodox theologians, like Strauss and Feuerbach and Bruno Bauer and these individuals, this is when he sort of blended their brand of theology, if you want to call it that, with this kind of radical politics that had become, very popular in the late 1700s in France. And so you have Marxism as a philosophy, and then with the Bolshevik Revolution in the early 1920s, that's when, again, the term communism and socialism people began using those terms interchangeably right around the midpoint of the 1800s, after the publication of the Communist Manifesto, as a matter of fact. But communists is sort of like the political, the practical, right? To sort of put these ideas into practice. This was Lenin's essentially this was Lenin's vision. This is when you hear people use the term, a Marxist-Leninist, because Leninists would take these, Lenin would take these ideas and say, okay, now we're going to implement them. But prior to Lenin adopting the term communist to describe his party, of course, the Russian communists referred to themselves as, of course, democratic socialists. Democrat socialist parties in Russia, democrat socialist parties in Germany, et cetera, et cetera. And so when people start to play these games with the language, even when it comes to fascism, I guess I don't necessarily have time to get into that, but it's a lot of people kind of split hairs when it comes to these things. I think a lot of times it has to do with people almost attempting to kind of flex their intellectual muscle a little bit, but for practical purposes, I mean, it really doesn't matter because it's all the same, right? They're just different. It's just totalitarianism under different names, and those who jock for power, so to speak, when it comes to determining who's going to be the one, or what faction is going to be the one to rule the roost. They kind of play these games, and they take slight ideological exception to this thing or another when it comes to a rival, and all of a sudden it becomes this big thing that people like to ponder about or toss around, when at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter, and I when you listen to the folks who are the intellectual heads responsible, for example, the popularization of fascism in Europe, they will tell you, even Adolf Hitler himself said that, make no mistake about it, our movement is Marxist. That's a quote of Adolf Hitler. And so, it really doesn't matter when you start playing these games. You hear it from the horse's mouth. They'll tell you exactly. And it's funny because most folks who defect from the Communist Party, as I mentioned before, admit once they have lived the life of a communist, they will say, communism. And again, I'm not trying to say that the horrors of fascism are to be looked over or dismissed. But essentially, they say there is no difference. And if they had to pick which one was worse, perhaps they would even say that communism is worse if you force them to pick. And so communists are very good at walking right up to the line, right? And it's difficult to know when exactly or at what point does the state have the authority to take action, right? Because some things are crimes and certain things aren't crimes. But communists are keen at walking right up to the line and not crossing that line, because the FBI is simply an intelligence gathering agency. They're not particularly looking for crimes, right? So that's the Department of Justice that is the responsibility of other aspects of our government. And so and communists, they know this. They know how to game the system. They know how to play the system, right? And again, they started doing this as far back as the 1920s, 1930s. So
I want to read this part of the papers to you guys. So it says, this part in particular says, through Levinson's influence, other subversives were attracted to the SCLC. Hunter Pitts Odell, former National Committee member of the CPUSA, was employed by the SCLC. in 1962 when King mentioned to Levinson that he was thinking of adding an administrative assistant to his staff. Levinson recommended Odell, who was then head of the SCLC's New York office. King said he liked the idea. At the time, King was well aware of Levinson and Odell's communist affiliations. This is the part that they mentioned. Listen to this and you'll see how everything Chuck said this is exactly what it is. The reason King enjoyed this close relationship with communists is best explained by the fact that Levinson in February 1962 passed the word to Gus Hall, General Secretary of Communist Party USA. King, this is a quote, King is a wholehearted Marxist who has studied it, Marxism, believes in it, and agrees with it. But because of his being a minister of religion, does not dare to espouse it publicly, end quote. Further, in March 1962, Levinson, I'm not saying that name right, but whatever, told CUSA functionary that King was concerned about a, quote, communist label being, quote, pinned on us, but that at the same time he wanted to do everything possible to evidence friendship toward the Soviet Union. In addition, King has been described within the CPUSA. This is the Communist Party USA saying he is a true, genuine Marxist-Leninist from the top of his head to the tips of his toes. The feeling within the CP at that time was and still is that King definitely follows a Marxist-Leninist line.
Keisha,
Baby.
Keisha, the thing is, I'm sorry to cut you off, Chad. I'll be brief, I promise. The thing going back to the intro, listening to Sink Uger say when he talks about, he mentioned RFK, JFK, King, he says that these are icons of the left. And of course, his conspiratorial mind, I guess he's trying to suggest that here you have this Republican administration is seeking to release these files to damage or destroy their political opposition because these are all left-wing icons. And the reason why I'm kind of like, I mean, it's interesting stuff. It's interesting information, I suppose, but I'm kind of like, yawn. Because yes, this, he's right when he says that these are left-wing icons. The reason why, and I've said this numerous times on this platform and other platforms, that the reason why someone like myself, and I don't claim to be special, I have some, insider information that no one else has access to, but this was open knowledge, especially amongst journalists and intellectuals of the left. They've been saying this, they've been putting this out for decades. And to Chad's point, when he spoke earlier, people just couldn't be bothered to pay attention, to listen. It was almost as if they didn't care. But they've been saying these things for the longest. Just going with what you've read, someone, a journalist by the name of Daniel Storm said what do you call it, that he had published in a religious journal describing King as a, quote, democratic socialist by, from the time that he was at Crozer Seminary. So,
I mean, in those writings, he said that he wanted to promote a social gospel or social something to that effect. So yeah, he himself said it.
Yeah. It was published in this work that I'm referring to was published in the Journal of Religious Ethics back in 1990. So this is folks have known this for a very long time, and of course you have someone who is history would probably regard as a racist or a segregationist, and that's the very controversial Senator Jesse Helm from North Carolina. He led a 16-day filibuster in the 1980s to block the federal government from establishing Martin Luther King Day as a federal holiday. And one of Jesse Helm's stipulations back in the 1980s was, okay, well, if you want to make King Day a national holiday, well, then, let's release the files. He was clamoring for this back in the 1980s. And, of course, eventually politically he didn't get his way. But people have known this, like Chad mentioned, These are not secrets. The people have known this for a very long time. King is the same king he's been for his entire life. You know.
Well, this is not yawn for me. I'm still hip to tea, honey. I'm still like there's still so much I just don't know, you know. So I mean, I it's still interesting to me, but I think Chad is something.
What are you gonna say?
Oh, okay. I thought you were still going. So in the report that you just read, Quisha, all of this is corroborated by Mortimer David Rubin, who was a former leader of the Young Communist League, which, by the way, was an organization that Bayard Rustin, who was one of Martin Luther King's top advisors and speechwriters, also belonged to the Young Communist League, as well as a young James Baldwin, who said that it was one of the few organizations that a young Negro writer could join. So he was part of the Young Communist League, and in 2015, shortly before he died, and we talk about this in our documentary, Mortimer David Rubin was basically corroborating everything that you just read in that file, talking about the directives that came down from the CPUSA as far as their involvement in the civil rights movement. When it comes to people like Clarence B. Jones, who was an attorney and a speechwriter for Martin Luther King, again, a tried and true communist, and they fancy themselves the intellectual, the strategists, the scientists. This is another thing that a lot of communists would call themselves, is that, oh, we're scientists. We have humanity figured out, and we understand the course of events and strategy and things of this nature. And they seek to use all of this to their advantage. There's another point that I wanted to make, but it slips me now. But yeah, again, I don't know if the video is still up on YouTube of Mortimer David Rubin basically doing like a tell-all, and he's not doing so because he's seen the light and he's no longer a communist, and I'm going to basically tell everything. No, he's doing it as a badge of honor. He says that now that we are where we are, now that McCarthyism is over, now that we have made all of these advances, now that we've made all of these strides, we can talk about these things openly. And so it's interesting that if you look at that video, whenever I ripped it for our film, I think it had all of 157 views on it. And this is a video that's been on YouTube since 2015. Wow. And this was a pretty prominent member of the Communist Party, basically telling us some pretty damning things about the communist involvement in the civil rights movement, and it had about 127 views. To me, this just kind of goes to show how little interest people have in this subject matter, and it's important because, as I said in that video, we as Americans, every election cycle, we're asked to invest with our vote, with our attention, with our devotion, with our allegiance into a political movement, a political party, a political policy that we are told will usher in a better future for us and our children. And anytime these promises are made to us, they do so invoking and quoting the likes of Martin Luther King and other socialists and Marxists over the course of the last 100, 200 years. And so we are building a future based on a faulty mythologized foundation. This is a complete deviation from our founding principles. And that's why this is important. We're not just wasting time sitting up here. We care about our country. And this is why this subject matter is important to talk about.
So Blanche, do you think that, so Ben Bay, like Beyonce Bay, I guess, Ben Bay, how you doing? He says, if you didn't live at the time, you really don't know what the hell you're talking about, but young Negroes benefited. Damn, Booker Washington pick, Damn. Blanche.
Well, I'm gonna say. I mean, well, Ben Bay is he's a Moorish national. That's one of the names. It's one of the names they pick. Bay is one of the names. And it's funny that he's a Moor and he's siding with Martin Luther King, which makes no sense. But I think the biggest issue for the average American is racism has been seen as worse than communism. So communism in comparison to racism is nothing. So when people think about communism, it doesn't seem as bad because people don't know the history of communism. They know racism. And so when they think about MLK, MLK is seen globally as a fighter against what? Racism. When you say communism, it don't even ring a bell. Folks don't, you mentioned communism today. People don't care about communism. They're not afraid of communism. It's racism is the issue. The problem is if I put Chad's documentary on the loud screen in front of the nation and played it, it would start a literal civil war. And it would, because think about what the implications are of King not being king. King not being king means that it shatters both political sides, because both sides of the political spectrum agree that King is the moral compass of America. He's the guy that was the good guy. He's the guy that we should look up to. He's the guy that had it right. He content a character, not the color of some, like all the stuff that people point to is they point to King, but in actuality, he was the worst. And he was the worst because, like Chad said, he was a deceiver. But I think the biggest problem is that it's the racism narrative competing with communism. So you can't even get to communism without, just like Bay in the comments. If you didn't give him that time, you can't say nothing about it. And then he's only saying that because of in his mind, he's thinking during that time period, white people racist, King did what he had to do. And so again, I don't even think that we even scratched the surface, not you all, but on a public level, of the actual ills of communism. When they mention communism to the average person like myself, it is a theory, it's a philosophy. It's not even something that's even real. Like, it's not even, they just mention this, oh yeah, this person was a communist, they thought this and thought that, oh well, keep it moving. Literally millions upon millions of people have died, hundreds of millions, they estimate, have died from these communist regimes. So I don't know, I think the issue mainly is this racism narrative, and that's competing with this communism narrative. I don't know how we get out of that, because King himself is the face of fighting against oppression. So I mean, I don't even know how we even do it. For Bay to be a Moor and be siding with King is insanity, because the Moors are the quote unquote sovereign citizens. They don't agree with the government. They fighting against the system. And he out here advocating for King. So clearly this King thing is deep to entrench the actual Moors who are quote unquote against this corporation called America.
Yeah, well, you know what?
Let's go ahead and Quisha, let us go ahead and take that comment down, and let us not suffer fools and trolls tonight.
I just wanted. I mean, I'm trying to,
spice it up a little bit. Yeah,
I mean, to Blanchard, I mean, this, for the longest time, I mean, these folks, I mean, they'll use, of course, I'll preach to the choir up here. I mean, but they'll use any, kind of stronghold where there's a solid organizational, administrative, well-functioning entity already in place, and they'll come in and try and take it over. And religion is prime for this, because religions have been around for centuries, and they're well functioning. They're just there to be subverted. Back in the 1910s and 1920s, you had, after the death of Booker T. Washington, say for example, you had a colossal figure like Marcus Garvey. They were playing around with these ideas of exactly what, if any religious focus, for example, should the Universal Negro Improvement Association have. And this is why, off of Pan-Africanism in these various totalitarian ideas sprouted such organizations like the Moorish Science Temple, such organizations like the Nation of Islam. You even had, a lot of these, I forgot the name of the one, a radical kind of Islamic movement in India that sprung up at the time. Its major progenitor had ties to a lot of black activism or black activist activities in the United States. So you had Muslims, you had Christians, and you had even black Jews were a part of the Universal Negro Improvement Association in some way, shape, form, or fashion, because the idea, even going all the way back then, was that, for example, Islam was probably the better religion, the religion that was speaking more so to people of color, and the religion that could actually free the black man from the chains of imperialism. And so this was the popular talking point. But when you had such major organizations like the NAACP, like the UNIA, you also had prominent religious figures, say, for example, a guy like Father Divine, who many of us have probably heard of. And then there were attempts to infiltrate Father Divine's organization to turn him and his organization. And I'm not trying to say that Father Divine was this, was a good guy or anything like that. He was a cult leader in his own respect. Yeah, so it really doesn't matter to Blanchard's question about he's supposed to be a Moor and King was allegedly a Christian.
Oh, dang! Chuck was cooking. Okay. Well, he's getting that together. So let's see. Well, anyway,
here's something. But I'm trying to find the page. Let's see here.
We all having internet troubles tonight. Good.
Chad and I don't ever have them for some reason. I don't know why.
I don't know. Y'all
don't ever have what?
Y'all we don't ever have technical issues.
Oh yeah.
Y'all must be the Moors or something.
Must be.
It must be your blackness that comes. Your black black dust that comes from the sun.
Blanche Bay.
Blanche Bay. But you know what is so sad is that people they hate, they love their lie more than they love truth. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what it comes down to. Like, I heard recently a minister who was saying like this was in the pulpit, and he was like, our country now is sometimes God will let an evil king come in and be president. I'm just thinking like, well, what the heck was Joe Biden? If this is evil, then what the heck was Joe Biden? And it just lets you know, like, people just, the lie that they have been holding on to. And this was me. Like, this is why it was so hard when Chuck was explaining to me, and then, Chad and, you guys telling me about who Martin Luther King was, why it was so difficult to, you got to just let it go. Why it shouldn't be hard when you see it, and it is what it is. It's the truth. It really shouldn't be hard for us to accept truth. And to me, I think when it's hard for us to accept this truth, like in the natural world, it's also hard for you to accept Christ as truth, because it cuts right down to the very heart of the matter. And like Jesus told the rich man, like, hey, you got to leave all your stuff, and he couldn't do it. To follow truth. Jesus was literally, he's walking truth, and they won't, you can't, you're holding on to all of these things that don't actually really matter. Even though it's a lie, but you'll take that and push away truth. I don't ever want to be that person. I don't ever want to be walking around holding on to a lie. Do you know what holding on to a lie can do to you? Holding on to a lie can lead you to the pit of hell. It can lead you to all types of craziness. Your life will be could be let off of a cliff because you choose to believe a lie. Like that is, I don't want to believe a lie. I don't want to hold so firmly to a lie that I reject truth. I don't want to be that.
Okay.
I don't want to be that kind of person.
All right, I found it. I thought it was The Phantom Public by Walter Lippmann, but it's not. It's Public Opinion by Walter Lippmann. And I know I shared this quote with everyone before, but I can't find my copy of Public Opinion anywhere. But Public Opinion is a book that was written in 1922 by Walter Lippmann, who was an advisor to many politicians here in the United States. He was part of the dinner party scene in Greenwich Village, New York in the 1910s, along with Mabel Dodge and Max Eastman, John Reed, who appeared before the Communist Comintern in 1920, in the early 1920s, 1921, I believe to be the case. Who was the guy that they called the Sage of Harlem? It wasn't H.L. Mencken, although they called him the Sage of Harlem as well. But there was another one. He was a kind of trendsetter, if you will, at least insofar that he was a journalist and a social critic who brought white attention to Harlem nightlife. Forget his name. Anyway, he was part of that dinner party scene as well. So Walter Lippmann, he writes this, and the reason why this is important to understand, this book, Public Opinion, is because Marxists would have studied the work of people like Walter Lippmann, Edward Bernays, and other so-called social scientists and cognitive scientists and so on, because they're trying to figure out the best possible way to manipulate the masses, to manipulate society, to go along with Marxism without realizing that they're going along with Marxism. Again, Marxists consider themselves scientists. They fancy themselves as scientists. They want to understand human behavior so they can basically leverage human behavior against itself for its own cause. So here's what Walter Lippmann wrote in his book, Public Opinion. Again, this was 1922. And I want you to tell me whether or not this explains Martin Luther King to a T. He says, when a new policy or campaign is to be launched, there is a preliminary bid for a community of feeling. In other words, they're trying to build public opinion. They're trying to basically shape people to go along with what it is they're trying to do. The prevalent, let's see here. I could probably pull this up on the screen. It says, let's see here. Okay. In the first place, the leader vocalizes the prevalent opinion of the masses. He identifies himself with the familiar attitudes of the audience, sometimes by telling a good story, sometimes by brandishing his patriotism, often by pinching a grievance. Right? Pinching a grievance. Finding that he is trustworthy, the multitude milling hither and thither may turn in towards him. He will then be expected to set forth a plan of campaign, but he will not find a plan in the slogans which convey the feelings of the masses. In other words, the campaign that he now pushes, now that he's in the good graces of the public, is going to be at odds with the slogans in the attitudes and the rhetoric that he used to win their favor in the first place, right? So this was written by Walter Lippmann in 1922 in his book, Public Opinion. And again, Walter Lippmann was one of the thinkers, the individuals that Marxist strategists would have studied, including that of Stanley Levison. Yes, Stanley Levison did have a copy of Walter Lippmann's Public Opinion on his bookshelf, and he just so happened to be the man who wrote Martin Luther King speeches, who was a kind of acting publicist for Martin Luther King, who told the cameras where to be when all the marches would take place and all the protests would take place. That was Stanley Levison, who owned a copy of Walter Lippmann's Public Opinion. Walter Lippmann being the man who says that if a policy or campaign is to take place, the very first thing that the leader must do is use rhetoric, use language to get into the good graces of the masses. And then the masses, basically wandering here and there, will look to that so-called leader for a policy or campaign, never mind the fact that that policy or campaign is completely foreign to the slogans that were used to galvanize their attention to begin with. That's Martin Luther King.
Mm.
That's Martin Luther King.
That's
Because
true.
he's talking about, all men are created equal and we hold these truths to be self-evident. It's a dream rooted in the American dream. He's basically appealing to patriotism and grievances, and the Negro still is not free. Everything Walter Lippmann talked about in this text, I'm going to read it again. The leader vocalizes the prevalent opinion of the masses. He identifies himself with the familiar attitudes of his audience, sometimes by telling a good story, sometimes by brandishing his patriotism. It's a dream rooted in the American dream. Sometimes by pinching a grievance. The Negro still is not free. The masses, wandering hither and thither, will look into this leader for a policy of campaign. What now must we do, Mr. Martin Luther King, now that you have our attention, now that you are in the ear of the president, now that you are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Well, it is time to take the civil rights movement in a new direction, says Martin Luther King in 1967. What is to be done? Well, I think now it's time to talk about a mass redistribution of economic power. Now I think it's time to talk about universal basic income. If the Negro is really to be free, I think it's now to talk about housing and all the things. We must undergo a massive poor people's campaign where we bring together indigenous people. He didn't, of course, use the words indigenous, but Indians and Mexican brothers and our Black brothers and so on and so on and so forth. Is that American? Is that Americana? Is that free enterprise economics? No, it's completely foreign to our American ideals. Because as a point, the point that we made in our documentary, for those of you who have seen the small portion of it that's out right now, that's about to be taken down, but when you look at the fact that you had a Jamestown, a Plymouth, that were in other colonies or areas in the colonies that were basically living by some of these communist principles before communism became this thing, this famous philosophy in the 19th century. You had people who were actually putting those policies into place, putting those into practice, and finding very quickly that they don't work. They're not effective, even in homogenous countries and colonies. And so they scrapped it. The founding fathers knew full well about the story of places like Jamestown. And so when they established our country, they did so not with the intention of having Marxist principles and Marxist ideas rule the country, but they did so, at least many of them, with this kind of small government idea, especially those who represented some of the southern colonies, the southern states. And so this is a story, once again, that really needs to be told. There is an agenda at play. There's a conspiracy at play.
Yes.
And unless and until you understand that you are being played, you're just gullible and going along with it. And I say that not to be mean. I say that not to be ugly. But when people get into my comment section and they try to argue with me based upon a 9th grade education that they got that sings the praises of Martin Luther King, and you're trying to come at me, and I'm not trying to flatter myself or pat myself on the back, but you're coming at somebody who has dedicated a good portion of my life studying this stuff. And you're coming at me with an education that you received in the 9th grade that tells you that Martin Luther King was the greatest thing this country ever produced. Please miss me with that. Please. Anyway, I could go on, but I'd rather not.
If you guys want to see a good read, a good drag, Nicole Hannah-Jones, the author of the 1619 Nonsense Project, she tried to comfort Chad in his comments. You have to go read it because Chad drugged that woman. Okay, I mean, and respect. Chad,
he didn't drag her by he drug her intellectually, not by the world's like.
Yes, I mean it was a drag.
Chad's dragging is an intellectual drag. Like,
yes.
So she'll figure out in about a couple of years. She'll be like, "Dang, he insulted me." But then,
right. Yeah. It was great. I was here for it. I'm like, it was very good. Oh, damn.
By the way, I hate that Chuck's not up here. I wanted to bring this up on the screen real quick because your boy, Chuck, if you're listening, and also your boy Quisha.
Oh, I know. I saw that. I was like, what is he trying to do? What is he saying here? Yeah, that was unfortunate. I am one.
Can y'all see this?
Yeah. I am once again reminding you that, hard as it is to say, MLK's entire legacy as a hero of American history rests upon the fact that he struck a perfect note that reiterated the founding American principles and aspiration of America at the perfect time in the perfect way. As hard, why is that hard? Like, if you really believe that, then why is it hard to say? And what'd you say, Chad?
Let me blow this down a little bit because I said a lot. No, actually, this is the extent of it. I said reiterated the founding American principles because I was actually quoting something that he said. I said, no, sir. The rhetoric of the so-called dream speech co-opted the founding principles, not reiterate them. Kind of like what I was talking about earlier with the Walter Lippmann quote. When you go from all men are created equal to the Negro still is not free in the same speech, it begs the question, how then must the Negro be free or get his freedom? The answer, according to MLK, was mass redistribution of wealth, universal income, social justice, Marxism. It was and is common practice of communists and globalists to use manipulative, quote, pro-America sounding, unquote, rhetoric to subvert the American public. They did the same with, quote unquote, Christian sounding rhetoric. It is unwise to gaze upon the Trojan horse and say, its beautiful colors reiterate the beauty we must all continue to be mesmerized by. Unquote.
Very good. Did he respond?
No, he did not. I don't think this part right here people get. And it's important that they do. It is unwise to gaze upon the Trojan horse and say, its beautiful colors reiterate the beauty we must all continue to be mesmerized by.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, I get it. No, nobody can get everything right. I think, James Lindsay gets a lot of stuff right. He gets this wrong, as most Americans do about Martin Luther King. He hasn't spent his time digging into it.
Yeah, but he's not getting it wrong, Quisha, because and this is my issue with, to me, this stuff is character based. He's not getting it wrong because he thinks Chad is wrong or not telling the truth. That's why he opens up with the statement, I know it's hard to say, I have to remind you or whatever, because he's saying that because he knows that what Chad is saying is the truth. The problem is that these people, again, they need for MLK to be real. If MLK is not real, then it shatters down. It takes down everything. Because think about it. If he isn't real, then who is the moral arc for America? Who, if it's not King, then who is it? Who can you point to say, okay, this person exemplifies what America stood for, you don't have one. And so now when you get rid of that, now what you have to examine everybody. And so the problem is, if King is a false idol, then that means everybody has to be examined. Heroes on the right, heroes on the left. So everybody is holding on to King being who he is, so we don't have to examine nobody. If King is this figure, we can always say, if everybody else is wrong, we can always point to this guy to be the quote unquote savior of America. But in actuality, because he isn't, and because it was so diabolical, so what they did was so detailed. I listened to Chuck and Chaz, I'm like, my goodness, these people was like, it's so intricate to where the average person is going to get lost on the first page. Like they won't make it to the end of the book. So I just think that the guy, he's not really responding to Chad. He's responding to everybody else, trying to let them know, hey, you guys, hold on, listen. King is still a good guy. He represented our founding fathers. Let's just don't rock the boat. If King is seen as who he truly is, it really shatters both sides, because now everything has to be examined. Everybody. Just like when Bill Cosby was found out to be Bill Cosby. Look what it caused. Bill Cosby being Bill Cosby. Look what happened after that. Everybody started getting a microscope placed on them, like, you know, you doing this, you doing that. And so to me, King is the same way. He has to, but again, for us to progress, he has to fall though.
So with that, before Martin Luther King, I don't think we had a national leader. There was no like national leader that everybody was kind of looking up to. So why do you think we need one? Like, okay, so what? Basically, if King's legacy turns out to be like not who he is, that happens to a lot of famous people. Why does America need that? Why do you think people feel like they need the leader like that? Like, for what? I don't get it.
Well,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Chuck. Or I'm sorry, Blanche.
Now, I was just going to say the same way that the world needs Christ. So if you think about it, all of these people attack the gospel first, and then they start branching out and start into their own whatever. But they always go to the gospel first. Mm-hmm. And again, because the gospel is so controversial, because there's a person in there that's perfect. Right. And because he's perfect, this means that there is a standard that we can't necessarily meet, but there is a standard for how we should live. And so when it comes to King, again, people looked at George Washington, people looked at Thomas Jefferson, people looked at Andrew Jackson, but these people were marred by what? Slavery. Now you have a person that isn't marred by slavery. He isn't marred by quote unquote oppression. He is a person that is supposed to be a Christian, a believer who sacrificed his life for the country. And again, it's all fake. We know that. But the symbolism behind it is this person is a martyr. That's why I believe his death was intentional, because you solidify his message. You can't question a man that dies for his quote unquote beliefs and his vision. And so you say, why do people need it? We don't need it, Quisha. But the problem is this whole thing has been centered around it. Like, think about this. Everything we're talking about today is piggybacking off of I have a dream.
Yes.
Like everything is. And so think about Roland Martin, the guy, they're talking about him like, don't worry about his personal life. Don't do this. I'm like, dude, you have to. I got to judge a man's personal life to see if he's legit or not. But anyway.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think my reaction to that question, Quisha, is that it's important to understand the times that Martin Luther King came to prominence in. And to your point, there wasn't here's who Black people like. Here's the Black leader. I mean, you did have Booker T. Washington, who was, I think people underestimate just how famous he was in his day. And likewise, people underestimate how famous Joseph H. Jackson was also in his day in the 1950s. But when you look at the message of the likes of Washington and Jackson, these were messages that were, on the whole, positive and inspiring, that encourage one to walk upright and to be a person of merit, and to basically love your neighbor as yourself. It wasn't this thing of like we're going to the government and we're demanding respect, and we're demanding to establish a largesse that distributes out goods and services to everybody, like just one big socialist nirvana. It wasn't what Martin Luther King was preaching and pulling for. But when you look at the times that Martin Luther King came into prominence, there were a lot of things happening around the country, a lot of so-called unrest, a lot of agitation and friction that was the result of communist tactics. The communists were setting fires to houses and bombing churches and doing all these things and saying it's white supremacy. And truth be told, for a lot of these events that were going on, it was legitimate, individuals who didn't like what the civil rights movement was doing, and so they acted or reacted irrationally. And the communists were banking on that. The point was to poke and prod so much that you cause persons to act irrationally. You can show the camera, you point the camera to that irrational behavior and say, see, white supremacy is alive and well. Look, they did this, they did that, they hung this person, they you know. So the whole idea was to poke and prod again, cause persons to act irrationally, and then write about it, broadcast it, to say this is what Black people have to fight against every day. And so they were creating the issues, and then they were grooming Martin Luther King over here to be this kind of up and coming hero who had a answer to the issues. Basically trying to make him like a new Christ, as it were, the moral leader who's coming and who's nonviolent and who's just trying to bring the races together. He's an image of and a symbol of unity. He's a symbol of coming together. So what they were doing was very slick, and it was very sneaky, and it was so effective that, you know, to the point someone made earlier, I think it was Blanchard or Chuck, you have folks on the right and the left who fell for it, and they're keeping this myth alive to this very day. And to the extent that folks like me or Chuck or Blanche or Ralph, Ellison or whomever try to sound the alarm, and, you know, people don't question whether the things we're saying is true or not. What they do is like, okay, well, why don't you just keep quiet? Like, you know, what will destroying him do? Like, what will that do? At least everybody's getting along now. Well, are they? Because how do you get a Mike Jenkins situation? Somebody, you know, to Blanche's point, a grown man, a fully grown man, was bullying a woman and her kids, trying to get a payday.
Right. So
that's the result of the legacy of the civil rights movement, the sense of entitlement that people have, to where they feel they can just go around bullying people, to where they feel like they deserve DEI and critical race theory and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
You call that resolved race relations? This dynamic between Black and white, where there's white folks who feel like they have to walk on eggshells around Blacks, that's resolved race relations? Okay.
A mess.
Hey, before you, I'm sorry, I don't know where we are in the conversation right now. I just want to say real quick, Obama internet, I don't know what's going on tonight. I'm having crazy issues. So if I get booted off again, that'll be my goodbye. So I just want to let you guys know. If I just disappear, that's it.
That's that Detroit internet.
Yeah, Detroit internet, man. I have no idea what's going on.
Them illegals trying to tap in over there.
And I know we're way past where we were 15 minutes ago, and I know we're through with Bebe. But I just wanted to just finish up just briefly what I was saying on the back of what Blanche was talking about, this guy who's a Moor, has a last name Bay or L or whatever. But yeah, you know, there's the so-called father or founder of Pan-Africanism was a man from the West Indies named Edward Blyden, and he wrote a book titled Christianity, Islam, and the Negro Race. And, you know, he mentioned this in his book about Garvey and him not seeing a difference between Christianity and Islam. And Garvey, of course, you know, he was brought up into the Catholic faith, you know, being a native of Jamaica. And it didn't matter to him whether Islam, Judaism, Christianity, and so on and so forth. Like I said, he had, you know, famous Black Jews who were part of his organization, who were spreading this idea of Blacks, you know, migrating back to Ethiopia, of course. So that tied in well with this Africa for the Africans that the Universal Negro Improvement Association was all about. He had ties to a man, I couldn't think of his name at the time, but his name is Muhammad Sadiq. He was one of the major figures, a part of India's Ahmadiyya movement, right? And so it doesn't matter whether it's Christianity, Islam. And then Garvey was one of the first prominent figures to introduce these ideas that, of course, all the central figures of the Bible were in fact Black, right? This first began this criticism of the so-called white Jesus image. You know, he was one of the first to make that whole thing popular, to rebuke this idea of the white Jesus. And so insofar as Christianity, and it ties into this thing with King, because trust me, King is the type of person and type of personality that had he been in another country, he would have used Islam to do the exact same thing, the same way in which communists use Islam to topple Iran, the same way in which that Moscow and the Soviet Union sent a lot of communist trained operatives into these predominantly Muslim, or sent them into these Muslim majority countries during the Cold War to topple their regimes. Of course, in an attempt to surpass the United States for global supremacy. So it doesn't matter. Islam is so as long as they can use the institution, use religion, they'll do it. And this was King's attitude. It goes back to Garvey. It goes back to every other political agitator who claimed to be a black leader. These opportunists who will use whatever institution they can to achieve their end, so long as, you know, that the goal, of course, is not the what each individual religion has to say about the nature of God, is only useful to them insofar that it helps them achieve their political ends, which is, you know, combating colonialism, imperialism, racism, like Blanche mentioned, etc. These aren't men of God, for sure.
And
So
by
I'm
the
sorry.
way, on that note, no, you're good. I think on that note, Quisha, I Have a Dream speech was so unifying, right? It was so patriotic, right?
Yes, that's what they
It was
say.
so moderate, right? Well,
Yes.
check this out. Here's one of the things, one of the many things people miss with the I Have a Dream speech. Let's see. Check out this. I have the transcript up. Here's a line from the speech. Quote, it would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This weltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off some steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. What is he talking about? Well, he's talking about the summer of 1963, when there was riots in, I think, Montgomery or Birmingham, one of the two, as a result of a bombing or something like that. They were
like a threat.
Bombing. And so this is a threat. That's exactly what it is. But the fact is, these bombings that were going on, it's questionable as to whether they were legitimate white supremacists or whether these were communists who were actually, again, setting fires to their own houses. There was, I mean, it's confirmed, there were Negro ministers setting fire to their own churches and saying white supremacy, right? And so it was all contrived. It was all this one big setup that was causing Black people to react and to take to the streets, and it was causing unrest. And Martin Luther King gets up there on that podium, or behind that podium, and he's saying that this is due to the Negro's discontent, his legitimate concern with business as usual. And unless the country give us our demands, you're going to keep getting this. This is your nonviolent moral leader of the 1960s or of the 20th century.
Right. It's Chad, you know, it's so strange to me listening to, you know, Roland Martin and of course the J. Edgar Hoover. He's the villain. So it's, you know, don't trust anything that the FBI says unless they're talking about Trump, of course. But no, that's, you know, we don't hate the FBI for the reasons why Trump and all his supporters hate the FBI, right? But don't listen to anything that comes out of this criminal government and J. Edgar Hoover. But what's so strange to me is the fact that, I mean, it's plainly obvious. I mean, this is conventional knowledge and facts here that the FBI actually went above and beyond to protect his reputation. It's the exact opposite. They were warning and said, listen, man, you know, you're the man, you know, you're the guy, you're the one who can actually, you know, whether it was, I mean, of course, they were wrong-headed in thinking this. But yes, they were warning King time and time again to clean up his act. They were afraid, in fact, that his philandering, the prostitutes, the physical abuse of women, the orgies, the cocaine, they were afraid that this stuff was going to get out. And they were trying to tell King to clean up his life because he was becoming the man. And said, well, maybe he's not the guy. Maybe he's not the guy to lead this civil rights, you know, revolution, right? To as Chad likes to mention, to large in the federal government. Maybe he's not the guy. You know, they went above and beyond to protect this man's reputation. And when, you know, you talk about the COINTELPRO program, of course, you know, COINTELPRO not only was used against King and his associates, used against organizations like the Black Panther Party, they used it against the KKK as well. destabilize, to destabilize them. And, of course, we know in the COINTELPRO program wasn't even this big elaborate thing that a lot of people want to make it out to be. It only lasted for a couple of years. It was eventually shut down, especially as it pertained to counterintelligence activities into the Black Panther Party, because what they discovered is that members of the Black Panther Party were actually exacting retribution on one another based upon a lot of this faulty intelligence, so on and so forth, because they didn't realize the manner to which these guys were, or the extent to which these guys were willing to kill. So they said, well, we might want to pull up the reins on this a little bit, because these men are actually going about the business of killing one another due to suspicion that this person or that person may be CIA, or this person may be a pig, and so on and so forth. And so we know about the counterintelligence program because you had a group of radical communist activists, of course, break into at one of the FBI buildings. I think it was in Philadelphia. Correct me if I'm wrong. And all of this information came out in 1971. And I actually have a copy of the book written by Ward Churchill, who wrote the COINTELPRO papers. And anyway, if you know anything about Ward Churchill, I think to this very day, he's still a professor at the University of Colorado. The man is a complete nut job, a complete and utter communist whack job named Professor Ward Churchill. So yeah, it's just funny to me that the king has been protected, by our government, because nobody was willing to say the truth about this man. They gave him so many opportunities, and he just, he wanted to go about it his own way.
I mean, that is kind of like the communist way, though. I mean, they are so dug into what they believe. It's hard, I think, to pull them away from that. Like, I mean, that's kind of like their MO. Once they believe it, they're in. It's kind of like a cult.
But how about Roland Martin? He gave that long little monologue there, and I could play it for you if you want me to, Quisha. But in the end of it, he what does he say? He says, "Here's what Black people should take away from this."
Yes. Can you play it again?
Roland got
I'll play it. I'll play it. But yeah, he says, here's what Black people should take away from this. And when you look at Roland Martin's YouTube channel, he has, I think, either 1 million or 2 million subscribers. I'm gonna pull it up real quick.
Roland showing his shape and the little outfit he got on.
So he has 1.5 million subscribers, most of whom I would say are Black. I mean, I don't see anyone else.
Come on, good and well, most of his followers is the Bliggity Coalition.
The Bliggity Coalition.
So yeah, he has here 1.57 million, right?
That is an old picture. That is an old picture, baby.
Look at that head, boy. Look at that. Y'all remember that Tootsie Pop Owl with the how many?
But my point and where I'm going with this is, when you look at his platform, when you look at his commentary, there's a lot of Blacks that listen to and watch Roland Martin. And so they are actually hanging on every word of the likes of Roland Martin and Tavis Smiley and Ricky Smiley and others, D.L. Hughley, who are all, they are all keeping Blacks in line to the extent that Blacks listen to them. Unfortunately, there's a lot of Black baby boomers who allow for their minds to go wherever the likes of Roland Martin will take them. And so when he says, here's how Black people must react or respond to this information on MLK, unfortunately, he is effective in that. So let's see here.
Folks, last night we had a conversation on the show.
Where'd it go? Okay, here it is, right here.
Damn thing. Something else happened today that I need to warn y'all. So Donald Trump signed an executive order declassifying all of the papers regarding the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Senator Robert F. Kennedy. Let me explain to y'all what's about to happen. What's about to happen. In 5 or 6 years, the FBI so-called recordings of Dr. King were set to be released. Those will now be released. The FBI, who I simply do not believe, claims that Dr. King, they have recordings of Dr. King having affairs, involved in orgies. They claim that he was with a white prostitute in Las Vegas. And these were all notes. David Garrow wrote a story. No American media entity would run the story. So he went to a small outlet overseas. And there were the notes. And these notes were a part of the JFK papers at the Library of Congress and National Archives. And so he wrote a story based upon the notes. So Charlie Kirk, Turning Point USA, when he did all his videos trashing King, oh, we shouldn't be celebrating him. Let me explain to you why they're doing this here. I just want y'all to understand what's about to come down. They are going to try to completely destroy the legacy of Dr. King. I guarantee you, when these papers are released and you get the recordings and all the stuff from the FBI, people are going to say, take his name off of streets, take his name off of elementary schools. We should not have programs honoring him. We should not have scholarship programs. He was not a moral man. I'm telling y'all, don't think for a second that this executive order signed by Trump, oh, it's all about, let's just get at the truth of what happens. I'm telling y'all right now, and let me just be on record right now, in advance of whatever is released. I'm just going to say this here, and I remember, and I'm going to quote my dear alpha brother, Andrew Young, when I asked him this question. I think we actually got it on tape as well in the interview that I did with him in Atlanta, when I asked him about this very thing, and he said, fuck him. Listen to me clearly. Anything that is released related to the private life of Dr. King, who was not a perfect man, no man or woman is perfect. Anything released from the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover and his COINTEL program is full of shit. They tried to get King to kill himself. They doctored tapes. They sent stuff to Coretta Scott King. I absolutely believe nothing, absolutely nothing that comes from this FBI as it relates to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and J. Edgar Hoover's name shouldn't even be on the FBI building here in Washington, D.C. because he was a racist, corrupt, evil son of a bitch. And that should be the reaction that every Black America gives when anything comes out about Dr. King released from this federal government and from this FBI.
That should be the reaction that every Black person gives. All this emotion that I just gave, all the cussing and just being a woman on his little show. No offense to women, by the way. That should be the reaction that every Black person has whenever this information comes out, says Roland Martin.
Oh, I'm laughing at Blanchard. Somebody he's showing his shape. Just stop laughing.
The chat says that he looked like he lost weight.
Sassy boy, I tell you.
That's because he's wearing all black.
Did Roland Martin ever address that little image that was broadcast of that naked man on his computer or whatever he was doing? Did he ever address that, Blanche?
No. He said it was a commercial or something. He said it was because somebody stopped in the grocery store mad at me behind that. Trying to explain. I said, listen, man. I said there is no commercial on TV or the internet
that's going to
show a naked man. So I said, stop. It's not
good. Stop. Right. That's dark MAGA cap. That's dark cap. And you have y'all seen that one where he's talking to Jermaine Dupri? He's like, whenever they do this, you got to jump in that ass. And then they slow it down and they're like, jump in that ass.
Let's pause that. What you got there, Jay?
So this is a book. It's called And the Walls Came Tumbling Down. By Ralph Abernathy. It's an autobiography.
Oh, he tells all. Ralph Abernathy tells all.
Ooh, for real?
Yeah, he tells all. Now, you don't believe Hoover, maybe you'll believe Ralph because he tells it all.
Yeah. So you had Roland Martin up there talking about, I'm not going to believe anything that comes out of that FBI file because the FBI is full of shit. Right? That's what he says.
So that's Ralph Abernathy.
This was Martin Luther King's closest friend.
Yeah.
Told it all.
Boy. And he talks about the prostitutes and the cheating and whenever they went to jail, I forget what year it was. Martin Luther King was dealing with this one young lady, and man, I wish I knew what page it was on. And Ralph Abernathy talks about a conversation he had with Martin Luther King and said, hey, you should probably stop dealing with her because they're after us. To which Martin Luther King responds, Abernathy, there's no way in hell that I'm going to stop dealing with her. And so
it's too good.
Yeah, it's just too
she's
good.
Too good to me.
That snapper, Abernathy, when I tell you, that snapper that she got, Lord have mercy. There's no way in hell that I'm going to stop dealing with her. So just don't bring up the subject no more.
He said, "Oh, she took me to the mountaintop."
I seen the promised land.
Man, I'm trying to find that. Anyway, it's not important. But yeah, the point is that it's not just the FBI. There's all kinds of accounts, including from Martin Luther King's closest friends who corroborate this information. I'm sure those who have been in Atlanta for some time, I'm sure they've heard the stories on the streets. And then too, like the children, the children who were born out of wedlock to MLK. I mean, it's all there. It's just too much of a paper trail, too much of a word of mouth trail to deny. And so for Roland Martin to sit up there and say that he doesn't believe it is, to Keisha's point, folks like Roland Martin needs it to be true, because to the extent that people stop believing it, it ends his authority, it ends his paycheck, quite frankly. And so he wants to keep Black folks in this kind of this haze, because to the extent that Black folks are angry and upset and discontent, and what are the Republicans up to now? Roland Martin gets to keep raking in the cash, and that's really what it boils down to.
Now, I did not know about his love child. So it says here, we can read this together. It says, with the funds, this is King's personal conduct. With the funds that he had received from the Ford Foundation, King held the first of 2 workshops in Miami, Florida in February 1968 to train Negro ministers in urban leadership. One Negro minister in attendance later expressed his disgust with the behind-the-scenes drinking, fornication, and homosexuality that went on at the conference. Now, when I read that line right there, y'all, I thought I was about to read like Martin Luther King was up there. He was doing too much. Okay, anyway.
Who brought the baby oil?
Basically. Right. Several Negro and white prostitutes were brought in from the Miami area. An all-night sex orgy was held with these prostitutes and some of the delegates in attendance. One room had a large table in it, which was filled with whiskey. The 2 Negro prostitutes were paid $50 to put on a sex show for the entertainment of guests. A variety of sex acts deviating from the normal were observed. Like, I can't even imagine what that was. And I don't want to.
Word was that King and his crew, they were so perverse that even word got around amongst the sex workers to pretty much say, hey, stay away from them, because I mean, they had some of the prostitutes doing things that was even beyond. It was too low for sex workers even. I mean, and there was stories where some of them wouldn't want to deal with King, because I mean he was too much of a savage, in whatever he was doing. So it was some, I don't know if it was some sadism going on, some mass. I don't know, but these are the stories that have been passed down from people closely connected to that whole circle.
Bring that stick in here. Bring that dog in here.
God, that is awful. Let's see. This activity is not new to King. and his associates. As early as January 1964, King engaged in another 2-day drunken sex orgy in Washington, D.C. Many of those present engaged in sexual acts, natural as well as unnatural. For if y'all read the Bible, y'all know exactly what that means. For the entertainment of onlookers.
Sodomy.
For the entertainment of onlookers. When one of the females shied away from engaging in an unnatural act, King and others of the males present discussed how she was to be taught and initiated in this respect. Throughout the ensuing years and until this day, King has continued to carry on his sexual aberrations secretly while holding himself out to the public view as a moral leader of religious conviction. Hold on, I want to read to you the part. Oh, here it is. King's mistress. It was learned in February 1968 from a very responsible Los Angeles individual in a position to know that King has been having an illicit love affair with the wife of a prominent Negro dentist in Los Angeles, California, since 1962. He believes King fathered a baby girl born to this woman inasmuch as her husband is allegedly sterile. The child resembles King to a great degree, and King contributes to the support of this child. He calls this woman every Wednesday and frequently meets her in various cities throughout the country. The individual who reported this is himself a prominent Negro who is related by law to King's mistress. He advised he has known King since 1960 and refers to him as a hypocrite. He also reported that King is having illicit love affairs with 3 other women, one of whom is Joan Baez. I don't know who that is, the nationally known folk singer. The prominent Negro who furnished this information said he was appalled that a man of King's low character could cause so much trouble for both Negroes and the government. The child, I was like, oh my God, like, why nobody has ever talked about this child? That was new information to me. I hadn't heard about him having like children, him being like a baby daddy. Like he's just like a regular bliggity. Like he's not, like he can't control himself sexually. He does not believe in God. He does not. He got children all over. You got children here and there. He's like the quintessential Negro. Crazy. But
let me read. Can I go ahead, Kish? You still reading?
No, go ahead. I just wanted to read the part about the child. Like that was news to me.
Let me read a passage from this book. This is one of my favorites. I've read from this book before. This author says, although it may seem blasphemous to say so, there's a great deal of similarity between Martin Luther King and a figure like Tupac Shakur. They both smoked and drank, worked hard, and with their insomnia waged a war on sleep. King and Shakur cursed, told lewd jokes, affectionately referred to at least some of their friends as nigga, had fierce rivals, grew up in public at the height of their fame, shared women with their friends, were sexually reckless, wanted to be number one in their fields, occasionally hung out with women of ill repute. As youths liked nice clothes and cars, were obsessed with their deaths, made a living with words, lived under intense scrutiny, allegedly got physical with at least one woman, had their last work published posthumously, and died before reaching their full potential. As with many other hip-hop artists, King shaped and revealed his persona through a name he was not born with. His name was legally changed from Michael to Martin, as we all know, so forth. Like many hip-hop stars, King preferred the company of light-skinned Black women and was accused of fathering a child out of wedlock. As a youth, King, like some hip-hop figures, twice attempted to commit suicide. And like some hip-hop artists, King, during his last 4 years, was often morose and even deeply depressed. Finally, King was, like hip-hop's greatest DJs and producers, a gifted sampler. That's a fancy way of saying he was, anyway, you know what I mean. A gifted sampler who recombined rhetorical fragments in an ingenious fashion, right? Of course, that's from one of our favorite scholars here locally. That would be none other than the illustrious Dr. Michael Eric Dyson in his famous book. In his famous book, I Might Not Get There With You, the true Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Of course, the original publication date of this book, or the original year, was 2003. Right? So I was a fresh young man. Huh?
Michael Eric Dyson wrote that?
I knew that was him.
I've been telling. That's what I've been saying. I knew of King because left-wing scholars have been telling on this man. You know what I'm saying? And so that's why when you were reading what you were reading, I mean, you know, and Dyson and others say like to play this game, kind of comparing. This is why in their minds, when you go from Black radicalism and it's kind of artistic component with Black exploitation and all of that stuff in the 1970s, you took that kind of 1970s American style, negritude, Harlem Renaissance, Black cultural sensibility, and it kind of morphed over into the whole hip hop era in the 1980s, 1990s. This was the continuation of that struggle, you know, the kind of rhetorical or the Black struggle, using, you know, rhetoric to kind of, you know, push back against these, you know, ills that confront, you know, Black folk, you know, here in America. And so in many respects, you know, the hip hop struggle or the hip hop voice, the hip hop movement is simply this long lineage, just continuation of the legacy of Black struggle in America.
Wow. You know, so Vic in the chat, he has a theory. He says MLK's status will only be further denigrated by, wait, that's not the one I wanted to read. He said, basically he was saying when people start to find out about him, it's going to make the Bliggities like him even more.
Yeah.
Well, here's how Ralph Abernathy, because he talks about it a lot in the book, and the walls came tumbling down. But I'll just read a few excerpts since we're reading excerpts tonight.
Okay, I got some more now. We can go book for book. Come on, let's go.
So this is from page 471 of "And the Walls Came Tumbling Down" by Ralph Abernathy, who's Martin Luther King's closest friend. It says, in addition to his personal vulnerability, he was also a man who attracted women, even when he didn't intend to, and attracted them in droves. Part of his appeal was his predominant role in the Black community, and part of it was personal. During the last 10 years of his life, Martin Luther King was the most important Black man in America. Indeed, he was the most important leader our people had ever seen, probably the most important ever. That fact alone endowed him with an aura of power and greatness that women found very appealing. He was a hero, the greatest hero of our age, and women are always attracted to a hero. But he also had a personal charm that integrated him with members of the opposite sex. Just get to the point. He was always gracious and courteous to women. I don't think this is the one I wanted to read, but he goes on to talk about this woman who they called his second wife. He says, as fate would have it, soon after the question had begun to trouble me, Martin and I were thrown into jail again, and once more shared a jail cell, where he was left alone for most of the day. Realizing that I would never have a better opportunity, I brought up the matter. Martin, I said, you can't really disguise the nature of certain friendships. If a man and a woman are particularly close to each other, it shows in the way they behave, the way they look at each other, and the way that they talk to each other. Don't sell these reporters short. They're much more alert and perspective than you give them credit for. Besides, a single female among a group of men is bound to excite their imaginations. It's natural for them to want to assign that woman to one of the men, and it's just as natural for them to assign her to the biggest man around. So whatever your relationship with her, you need to cool it down. So this is Ralph Abernathy trying to tell Martin Luther King, hey, you need to slow it down. So whatever your relationship with her is, you need to cool it down. With Hoover's men hiding under every bed, you just can't afford to continue the way that you are going. Sitting there on the edge of the cot, he stared at the wall for a long time, weighing what I had said. When he answered, it was with a friendly but firm tone. Ralph, what you say may be right, but I don't care. Nor do I care what Mr. Hoover thinks of or says. The FBI can do whatever he please, but I have no intention of cutting off this relationship with that woman. So
this was the woman he has the baby with?
No, that's the woman that they called his second wife. He probably did have a baby with her. But the fact is, like, to Chuck's point, like, Martin Luther King was notorious for these kind of relationships, for just sleeping around, just being a dog. And it's not just the FBI files that Roland Martin is trying to make it out to be. These are people who are very close and intimate with Martin Luther King, who even they were telling him, man, you need to chill. And he's like, I have no intentions of chilling. I have no intentions of, I don't know why I sunk down. I have no intentions of cooling off. I'm going to keep right on going the way I'm going. So,
yeah, like say, who his close friends, his so-called enemies, you know, say higher ups in the FBI, the Kennedys were close to him. Say, bro, listen, you know, these people out here, I mean, they're looking at you, they're coming to get you. Anything that you do, can say, can be heavily scrutinized. Do you realize that you're going to ruin this entire thing we got going on here, you know? And like Chad said, you know, the man didn't care. You know, he was so you know, high on himself, and he was so, I mean, and I think again too, just from my research of King, this was like part and parcel of his personality. He was always, even, you know, from the time, I mean, I hate to say this about, you know, essentially someone who was a child at the time, but it didn't seem like he matured much. And that probably had a lot to do with the fact that he was, since his earliest days, seen as almost like this golden child, and maybe prodigy is too strong a word again, because he wasn't particularly exceptional, right, intellectually, but he was always sort of like handpicked, and maybe that kind of stunted or
he had that it factor.
He had that it factor, and perhaps maybe that circumvented his maturation, his maturity. But he kind of remained almost like the same arrogant child he always was when he was younger, and a teenager. He sort of remained that person until he died. And so he was always, you know, this way. You know, he couldn't be bothered. You know. He wouldn't listen.
That like sends me down a whole like thought of his mental state. Like, what kind of person? I mean, yes, he was a liar. Like, I get all that. Like, but like, it doesn't even seem to me when I hear that, because it would seem like he would want to keep the communist thing going. Like he would want to accomplish his agenda, his revolution. But all these things would damage that, and he didn't even care about that. So that is I don't understand that. I honestly I don't understand that type of mentality.
And I don't know, guys. This thing about, you know, no man is perfect. I even was it Blanchard I just heard recently was saying about sin or something about everyone falling short. I mean, it's in the Bible, right? About, you know, everyone falling short. I can't remember exactly how it's worded. But when Roland Martin talks about it being nobody's perfect, I mean, bro, come on now. You know what I mean? Come on, bro. And that's what's so crazy is what Chad always reminds us of is the fact that King had he had the identity, the marker. He was a pastor. He's a religious man. When you hear a lot of people talk about how so much great progress was done in terms of racial uplift, and how, you know, America had to reshape and reform itself and help, you know, or rid itself of its you know, racism and all these things. And they said, well, and to top it all off, the fact that the movement began in the church, this began as a religious movement, a Christian movement especially, gives it some kind of legitimacy But the fact remains, of course, that this man was never a Christian to begin with, right? Because I'd be the first person. I'm not perfect, right? I curse, I get angry, I do all type of stuff, right? I shouldn't be doing, thoughts that I shouldn't be having, right? And so on. But where do you? I mean, seriously. And I get it, right? I mean, we all fall short, and as the Bible says, we're all deserving of hell, right? We're all deserving of hell, right? But when you talk about just kind of, contemporary standards of morality, I mean, essentially, where do we draw the line when you're describing these things, Quisha, and you're reading these things? To me, there seems to be a huge gulf between this notion that, well, not everyone's perfect, to drug abuse, prostitutes, multiple women, illegitimate. I mean, this man was a complete degenerate. You know what I'm saying? I mean, what do you mean? No one's perfect. This isn't someone who, you know what I mean, Chad? You cheat on your wife or something. But I mean, when you just... it seems to me like there's a huge separation between those things.
What their mind does is understandable, because it goes back to what I said earlier about the fact that every single one of us up here on this panel, everyone who is watching this show right now, looks like we got collectively around 1,100 people watching right now. If you went to school in America, public, private, doesn't matter, chances are you were taught about the greatness and the glory of Martin Luther King Jr., that he brought America into the future, that he stopped Americans from being racist and helped Black people gain first-class citizenship. That is what they are taught about Martin Luther King. And so what their brain does upon hearing this information of how deviant he actually was is say, okay, well, that might be true, but all this great stuff that I learned about him doesn't necessarily go away. And so the conclusion they come to is, well, no one's perfect, right? So it's this juxtaposition that they're kind of drawing in their head. But the reality of it is, and as we'll show in our documentary, is that not even that's true. He didn't do all these great things that you were told he did. It's just not true. As I said earlier, as I tried to articulate earlier in the clip, was that had things gone the way that they were going before Martin Luther King, you would have had the shedding and the elimination of Jim Crow laws. And sure, some of them may have been slower than others. But you would have had, to the extent that you would have gotten an improvement of race relations, it would have been genuine. It would have come from the heart. It would have been genuine, because you didn't have the government forcing it. You didn't have some activists who is agitating and protesting and doing all the things. It would have been people coming together around shared interests. It would have been business persons realizing that the maintaining of these Jim Crow ordinances was just unfeasible and was draining their own pockets. It would have been that. And so you would have gotten an improvement of race relations on the one hand, and a relatively small government, federal government on the other hand. Because of Martin Luther King, you got the facade of improved race relations on the one hand, where Blacks are, certain Black activists are bullying people, you get the likes of Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, who are making millions of dollars off of situations that any ordinary person can look at and say, well, that's not actually a racist incident. But because they're telling us it's a racist incident, people are going for it. You get just this mess that we have on the one hand, and then you get an expanded federal government on the other hand. And so what you get as a result of the legacy of Martin Luther King is actually a misdirection of American freedom. You get this kind of quest toward this globalism thing that we see going on right now. That is the legacy of Martin Luther King. And so what you were told in your schools was an actual lie. And it was all done because of this idea that here you had this Negro minister. And so he used the dignified position of a pastor to push this thing, to push this expanded role of the federal government. That's what he did. He was a deceiver. He was a liar. J. Edgar Hoover called him, and I agree, the most notorious liar. And so that's who he was.
Wait, what
he
was it?
Deceiving.
He called him the most. I think he said something with Chad. Was he called him the most notorious liar in America? Yeah. And it's funny because Hoover was largely silent. Hoover became more, and maybe this speaks to J. Edgar Hoover's ego. Of course, I'm sure he had one because no man is perfect. But Hoover would say these things about King when King would snipe at him. So they would kind of have this war of words like back and forth. Yeah. And when King would say something about Hoover or say something about the FBI or whatever, you know, make have these criticisms about the American government, or again, Hoover more specifically, Hoover would say, "Hold on now, well, you listen. I know stuff about you now. If you keep saying these things about me now, it's like, boy, well, you just don't know." He was, boy, I'm gonna tell it all. Keep talking about me. Say it again. So from my understanding, right? So my understanding of that famous quote from Hoover, he was saying that in response to something, I can't recall what it was. Chad, correct me if I'm wrong. Something King said about Hoover, and then Hoover responded with that little snipe. So they would always kind of snipe at each other back and forth.
Right. But so he called him the most notorious liar in America, and he was. I mean, the fact is, to Ralph Abernathy's point, he, like, the last 10 years of his life, he enjoyed all of this popularity. And it wasn't merely by the fact that Martin Luther King was just this genius that America was realizing they had in their midst. No, it was all a setup. Again, Stanley Levison knew full well what he was doing when it came to publicizing MLK, when it came to pulling in favors from his buddies in the media, in terms of getting Martin Luther King's face plastered on Time magazine as the man of the year, when it comes to him winning the Nobel Peace Prize. All of this stuff was the doing of Stanley Levison, his handler. And so Martin Luther King was really feeling himself. He thought he was untouchable, as Vince Everett Ellison, who I interviewed, put it. Martin Luther King was in the White House, like he was in the president's ear, because the fact is, yes, he was a Marxist. Yes, his whole movement was a Marxist movement, and our federal government stood to gain from that, because our federal government understood that to the extent that you have the social justice movement in the streets, who is galvanizing the masses to be in favor of the pushing of legislation, the government stood to benefit from that legislation, because what you're doing is you're usurping the rights of the states and you're putting it into the hands of the federal government. That is what that movement was about, usurping the rights of the states, bypassing the individual, the private business owner. Because when it comes to this whole deal of integration and who to serve and who not to serve in the restaurant, and what door does this person go through versus don't go through, again, the state shouldn't have even been meddling in that kind of interaction between persons. And so the states were being tyrannical as well, depending on what state it is you're talking about. But when it comes to a lot of these Jim Crow laws, again, they were ordinances at the local level. Many of them were, and they were being repealed well before MLK. And so the fact is, what the federal government saw was an opportunity to use this situation, to use this moment to grab power. And so it was to that extent that they gave Martin Luther King an audience. It was to that extent that they allowed for him to be in the ear of JFK and then subsequently LBJ. And then when they were done with him, they realized that, well, he's actually of more use to us dead than he is alive. Yeah. And what did they do after he died? They got right to work. Coretta Scott King, Clyburn Carson, and others. They paid Stevie Wonder, to come up with this song, "Happy Birthday to You," as a kind of propaganda tactic to Blanche, as a propaganda tactic to basically emote the American public into backing the enshrining of Martin Luther King as a national holiday. And then after that, after they were successful in doing that, and by the way, Ronald Reagan initially was against enshrining MLK as a national holiday, but due to pressure not only from outside the White House, but inside the White House from none other than George Herbert Walker Bush, who was also a CIA plant, they got Reagan to understand that by making Martin Luther King a national holiday, the federal government can stand to benefit from this. So they gave the people what they want. They gave them a national holiday. And then after that, Clyburn Carson and others got to work and pushing for the erecting of a 40-foot monument of MLK, a statue of MLK in Washington, D.C. And as Vince Everett Ellison points out, when you read the etching on that monument, it says nothing about him being a pastor. It says nothing about him being a Christian. It talks about him being an activist and wanting equal rights for all people. And Martin Luther King is the limitless credit card that the government cashes in every time they wish to push a policy that will only serve to expand its power.
Wow.
Understand what's going on, folks. You think you get Martin Luther King to he makes me feel good about myself. He makes me feel, equal and all these things. No, that's all a facade. That's to get you to be dumb enough to be supportive of the expanding of your federal government at the expense of your own freedom. I don't know how else I can explain this, Quisha.
That that was so well said. I mean, that is like very on point, on target, right on nail on head. That is it. That Martin Luther King is the limitless credit card that gives the government power to expand itself. It's I have to. It's past my time. I did want to say though one last thing. In that PDF, it does talk about. I think Chad or Chuck mentioned him being a globalist and wanting to go bigger. That was the plan. Like they tried to inject him into the Vietnam War in efforts to help him to expand basically his brand. They were definitely trying to take this global. And the Nobel Peace Prize and all that stuff as well. So I mean, for those of you who are listening, if you can't see it, like Chad has been blowing the whistle on this for years, and praise the Lord, it is finally starting to be exposed. But yeah, so it is right there. Don't deny the truth. You're playing yourself. When you deny truth, you're playing yourself. Like, and who wants to play themselves? Like, that's whack. That's kind of stupid. So, but anyway, I love you guys. I gotta go. Thank you to the chat. Thank you to all the moderators. I will see you guys later. But you guys continue to have a great show. See you. Bye.
All right, yeah. Hey, Chad, let me if I may, let's story time. Let's go. I just want to read a excerpt, book time. This author here says of King, it says, King is remembered as a moderate this speaks to what you were just talking about. King is remembered as a moderate integrationist whose oratory offered gentle inspiration to all Americans, yet his vision was deeper than a call for rights and equal opportunity. While the 1963 March on Washington and its free at last language is often viewed as the culmination of King's vision, it was in fact a rallying call to the next stage of the struggle. I'm gonna skip down a few lines. Now, this person brought up Douglas Storm. I brought up Douglas Storm earlier, and I have a whole video for those of you watching who don't know. I have a whole video on my YouTube channel a lecture on MLK, and it could have been much longer. And I was thinking about going back and doing another video on King, but I've been doing so much work here and so much work with Chad, you know, it pretty much defeats the purpose. But I made reference in that video to Douglas Storm's 36 page long essay titled Martin Luther King Jr. as Democratic Socialist. This was published in the Journal of Religious Ethics in the fall of 1990. This author here refers to Douglas Storm as well. This author says, while most King biographers detect a change from the time of Selma to a less optimistic and more radical King, right? So he went from optimistic to more radical. But according to Douglas Storm, according to this author, insists that this discernible change is not a transformation, but simply a refinement of his basic orientation. From the time of his student days, King's thought was democratic socialism, informed by his Christianity. So it makes sense of that. It is this radical King, says this author, whose democratic socialist call for the radical reconstruction of American society was grounded in the values of the Black church. So that excerpt, this is actually a breakdown in the philosophy of Cornel West. This was written by a Cornel West biographer named Rosemary Cowan. And this book is titled Cornel West, The Politics of Redemption. And he refers to this author and West and others refers to King's brand of Christianity as quote unquote prophetic Christianity, which is another way of saying, of course, liberation theology and the social gospel, etc., etc. And it goes on. But yeah.
You know, I think about it, they pretty much had to kill King because eventually he would have done something that was they would have compromised everything. If he was that reckless, he would have eventually did something that would have been too much. And I think when they did kill him, it was the right time because, after that, you see where we are today. But just hearing everything that he did, he was like a wild dog, just into everything, all the leverage, all the power, insatiable appetite, just couldn't be controlled. I don't know. I just think that it was almost like, that book of Mice and Men, you got to take him out back, man, and pop him because I don't know. I just think he's too much.
I mean, on that note, Blanche, on the night before he died, he slept with two women who weren't his wife and beat up one woman.
Yeah. He beat up somebody, yeah.
It's too much, though. It's too much. Matter of fact, if he had grew old, his legacy wouldn't have been the same. Like if he'd have been alive during all of this, it'd have been watered down, it'd have been destroyed. So he had to go. Like there's no way he wouldn't be able to be used as a figure.
Yeah. And Ralph Abernathy tells of that because that's in Ralph's autobiography that you just mentioned, right? Chad, that story about the woman he beat up the night before his assassination.
Is that what you thought I was going to read earlier?
I thought you might have went.
I wanted to corroborate what I was talking about in terms of there's no way I want to leave that woman alone. But yeah, I mean, you're right. That he does tell the story of the fact that after the mountaintop speech, the famous "I've been to the mountaintop and I've seen the promised land, and we as a people will get to the promised land." That night, he leaves and sleeps with one Black woman and one white woman. And then his second wife, who worked for the SCLC, confronted him about it. He beat her up, and then she storms off, and he doesn't see her again. And then the next day, he gets popped.
And Chad, and it's funny when you talk about Jim Crow and all this stuff. A lot of people say, "Well, throw all of that. I mean, yeah, but you have to eat the meat, spit out the bones, and don't throw out the baby with the bathwater." But even still, like you said, state by state, locally, we're going to do this. We have to do it in the correct manner because, again, we see where we are today, right? But even with Jim Crow, I mean, oftentimes, whether Jim Crow laws were still in effect or whatever, we had reached a point by the 1940s, 1950s
They weren't even
where
being
people were
enforced.
just ignoring them. They weren't even being enforced.
Just like the
People just
mask mandates.
Yeah, people
People
just
forget.
was ignoring it. Blacks were ignoring it. Whites were ignoring it. And in my mind, I wish I could, find it real quick, but I'm not even going to try to do that. Maybe I'll try to find it while someone else is speaking. But I always remember Howard Zinn. Even Howard Zinn is a very ominous figure in the background of the civil rights movement. And Zen was very, he was one of those early, because Zen started with his communist agitprop way back in the 1930s, and by the time he became like this accepted academic and intellectual, he was brought down to the South, and the HBCUs. It is well documented how he just rained hell upon a Spelman's campus.
Spelman's, right?
Completely
Having sex
turned
with all the female students.
took what was once this conservative kind of Christian school, just turned it completely upside down, single-handedly, almost. I don't want to make it make him seem, but yeah, he had a huge effect, right? By the 1950s, I mean, he was upset at the fact that a lot of the radical sentiment had began to taper off, because in Howard Zinn's own words, and I've read this on the show before, in Howard Zinn's own words, he says, and I'm paraphrasing, or I may even be quoting him, can't recall, but he says something to the effect that capitalism is working. It's working even in the South. He said, we're seeing blacks and whites come together. He's talking about black people are being treated with respect. They're being served by whites. They're being called sir and ma'am. Sometimes they go into department stores or wherever, white employees are greeting blacks first before they greet. I mean, blacks were being treated with respect in the South and the North and everywhere. And according to Howard Zinn's own words, he says the free market was working, right? Even it's funny, just going back to the documentary that Chad is working on currently, that I featured in. I mean, this was something that blew my mind when I found this out, that then President Andrew Johnson, who was Abraham Lincoln's successor, when he was pushing back against a lot of these civil rights measures that were being taken up by the legislature back in the 1860s, Andrew Johnson said, and I quote, "Let the market take care of it," right? We don't have to go and pass all these things don't make sense, especially when it comes to a lot of the Civil War amendments or whatever. I won't go down that line, but many folk like Andrew Johnson thought the language was too bland. It was too vague. What are you talking about? Equal protection, these kind of things. What does that mean? What does equality mean? Andrew Johnson, had the presence of mind to know that, hey, something is wrong here. And what do you mean with this, this idea of equality? It sounds to me like this could potentially trample on the Bill of Rights. And then you fast forward 100 years later, and they were still trying to achieve and accomplish the same things. But again, Howard Zinn even said that racism was becoming essentially like a thing of the past, and you didn't need state intervention to achieve racial harmony. The market was taking care of it. Right.
And that's and on that note, Chuck, this is why, and I don't think people understand, even like a lot of people who watch regularly our show, Cutting Through the Culture, who, most of whom, 99% of whom I would argue are conservatives. But even many of them, unfortunately, don't understand this whole idea of it's not okay to be uber partisan. Andrew Johnson was a Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
Grover Cleveland was a Democrat.
Right. Garfield, Democrat.
Yeah, Garfield was a Democrat. I mean, and then too, you look at, a lot of people we like, Reagan, Trump, are Republicans, but really, like, if you look at the history of politics in America, the good guys have not always been Republican, and the bad guys have not always been Democrat.
That is true.
It's bigger than that. It's bigger and deeper than that. It's bigger than partisanship. And this is why, like, I don't belong to a political party. Now, you could argue that in our at this juncture in American political scape, the Republican Party is a quote unquote better party than the Democrat Party. I'm not going to argue that. I mean, I agree with that. However, it is far deeper than that. And I think what people really need to understand is what is the true American heritage? What is a true American idea? Are we living up to that, or have we deviated from that? And even more importantly is what is the best form of government in a quote unquote free society? And I think to the extent that one understands the answer to that question, they will be less inclined to fight for partisanship and be more inclined to push their representatives that they do have access to get back to that, and then live and epitomize that in their own lives, instead of just being so devoted and basically susceptible to the administrative state, because you have Republicans who are advancing the cause of the administrative state, and you have Democrats who are advancing the cause of the administrative state. And to the extent that we argue Republican versus Democrat, we're all being played, is really what it boils down to. So anyway,
I'm sorry, just correction. I in my mind, I was thinking Cleveland, but then the name Garfield came out because I'm actually a fan of
Republican.
Yeah, he was. But I was thinking Garfield because
that's my fault. But you said it.
Yeah.
So I was like, Chuck knows.
Yeah.
So let me let me not look like a fool.
No, you're good. No, the reason why my wires got crossed because I actually like Grover Cleveland and the way he handled things, especially when it came to, he's known as nothing could get past Grover Cleveland. Everything that came to his desk, he virtually, shot it down. And so, he was very wary of the federal government largesse.
They try to pin that sentiment of nothing could get past him, and he was a small government guy and all that. They try to pin that on Hoover. They try to say that Hoover was the guy.
No, absolutely not. But the reason why I was thinking Garfield, because when you were talking about how it's not always black and white, because Garfield was one of the first presidents to really, have a major public scandal. As far, of course, he was assassinated, but after the fact, then all this information came out about him and his philandering and a lot of his sexual misdeeds, and so that's why a lot of my wires were getting crossed there when I was making reference to him. But to your point, even when it comes to Andrew Johnson, the way the Republicans did Andrew, it was wrong. It was flat out wrong the way they tried to destroy. They impeached him. He was one vote away from being removed, the closest we've ever seen to a president actually being convicted. And it was some bogus, trumped up charge because the radical Republicans at the time
led by Thaddeus Stevens and his
Thaddeus Stevens. Yeah, and Thaddeus Stevens was something else, especially when it came to, not to change the subject too much, but Thaddeus Stevens was something else when it came to his hatred and vitriol towards the southern states. He hated them, and Thaddeus Stevens even said in so many words that they should be made to pay. And if they do not get in line and get on board with this new Reconstruction agenda, Thaddeus Stevens was, he was virtually in favor of, I hate to sound hyperbolic, but lining people up and executing. He really was in favor of bringing the hammer down, even if that meant violent retribution for those who were against the agenda of Reconstruction.
He was worse than Bernie Sanders.
Thaddeus Stevens was something else. If you all don't familiar with Thaddeus Stevens, he's relatively unknown to history unless you study these things. But you'll run across
the movie Lincoln.
Yeah. With Daniel
Day-Lewis. Who is it? It's directed by what's that guy's name? Who directed E.T. What's his name? Steven Spielberg directed the movie Lincoln, and Thaddeus Stevens. If you watch it and you just don't know history, you would think, oh man, he's a champion for the Negro.
No, Thaddeus Stevens was something else, man. He He was something else.
He had a black wife.
Right. Right. So yeah, man, it's like Chad said, it's deeper than that. But yeah, Thaddeus Stevens said the South should be treated like a conquered enemy. They should be treated like a conquered enemy and not like fellow Americans. They're a conquered enemy and should be treated as such. I mean, he was ruthless, man. He was ruthless.
What do you think, Blanche?
About what in particular?
Right, we was talking like Blanche just sitting there like, y'all play for.
I guess any of it.
About what? The whole?
Yeah, just the whole thing.
I mean, you all been, covering King. You've been putting out snippets. I've been talking about it. I mean, at the end of the day, it boils down to people want to accept the truth or not. And I mean, you'll see that this boils down to a moral issue. Chuck asked earlier about when they say nobody is perfect. That statement, the intent behind that statement is not to say nobody's perfect, I'm going to be righteous. It's intended to say nobody's perfect, I'm about to go be foolish. And so people say it to go and be decadent. They don't say it to edify God. And I think when it comes to King, on one hand, they'll say that he's this moral guy. And then when he's not that moral guy, they're going to say, well, none of these other guys are either. It's almost like they play both sides of the fence with King. One minute he's a moral leader, the next minute he's not. It's just, but it just really boils down to character. And I just think that it's just tough for people to swallow the truth. Your whole life we've been fed this stuff. When Neo was in the Matrix and he told Morpheus he wanted to get out, and they unplugged him, and he was in the room and he said, I can't go back in. And he was like, no. And I just think that, once you all start shedding the light on these things, people can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. And so now the only response is to either accept it or to attack what you all are saying. Most of the time, we just attack you all versus what you're actually saying, because they can't actually attack what you're saying. That's why Roland Martin said your response to what you hear should be this. He didn't say examine what you're about to learn or what you're about to hear. He said your response should be F it. And so I just think that where we are as a society, people don't want to think anymore. It's easier to just accept it. It's easier to just not have your beliefs challenged. It's easier to not. I mean, this stuff is life changing. Just imagine people that y'all know that's older than us. They don't. King is what? No. Elijah Muhammad was what? No. It's just they're not ready to let it go. And I think it's just sad in the information age with all this information at people's fingertips, they still don't want to know. So I don't know. I just think that King is a figure that has to be, he won't be torn down, but he has to be flawed. Like he has to be wounded in a sense. Like you got to look at him and say he wasn't perfect to the point where not even his beliefs, not forget the orgies and the coke. I'm talking about even his beliefs were flawed. That has to happen, because if it doesn't, it's just too much going on now. He has too much. It's just too much. His legacy has too much power.
Yeah, and that's why, Blanche. Whenever I set out to make this documentary about Martin Luther King, which, by the way, it will be called the MLK Project. I'm going to make the title as broad as I possibly can.
Hold on, people were saying combine the two.
Oh, combine the two. Okay. I'll try to figure out how to do that then. But when with this project, it wasn't wise, in my opinion, to just open it up and just go straight to Martin Luther King and he was this, he was that, he was the other.
Yeah.
Like, people have to be re-educated, not necessarily re-educated, but properly educated about our own history, the history of America, because you can't make sense of Martin Luther King without first understanding real American history dating as far back as America's founding, and even before that, when they settled here on this continent. It's important to understand that. It's important to understand the kind of country that was established it's important to understand small government and the free market. It's important to understand all these things. It's important to understand the popularization of the Communist Manifesto and the impact that it had on our own House of Representatives over the course of the 19th century. It's important to understand what they call the Civil War and what that war was really about. It's important to understand the struggle of ideas. It's important to understand the fact that the Negro was well on his way and was making many advances in terms of literacy. I mean, you can read Thomas Sowell's work to verify this, but in terms of literacy, in terms of property ownership, in terms of entrepreneurship, in terms of family formation, it's important to understand that trend from the late 1800s into the mid 1900s. It's important to understand communist agitation and infiltration and instigation and violence and trying to pit this race group against that race group and how they sought to capitalize on that. It's important to understand that and how Martin Luther King came out of that tradition and how he was groomed and how the media worked hand in hand with the communists to manipulate the public and to popularize MLK. It's important to understand how after all of this went down in the 80s, they worked together with the federal government to establish and enshrine him as a national symbolic figure that they might then use again and again and again and again to expand its own power. All of this is a story that needs to be told, and it's the reason why we set out to make this project. It's not enough to say Martin Luther King slept with a lot of women, did drugs, he was a bad person. No. We want to give you the full story. And so as a result of that, this is why we're making this work. So,
and I also think that some of the pushback is too that if he's not a valid figure, then it kind of has you look at the past differently. You know, if King wasn't a necessary person, then what was actually going on? And you think about it, if he was contrived and created to push this agenda, let's say he was created to push this communist movement forward, then where was America actually headed? Because if you got common sense, you would say, well, if America was headed in a certain direction and they wanted to steer it in a different direction, then that means that America was on its way to something that these people didn't want it to be. And I think that when you talked about, I played your video on my channel, the 45-minute clip, the beginning intro, and I was talking about how the history has to be told properly in order to move to the present. You can't, we're jumping to the present, but it's based on a false history. We have to go back and re-examine the history. And most people are comfortable with history being slavery, America built on slavery, they hated black people. It's just easier to digest, and all this stuff. But then when you get to the nuance of it, and that wasn't the case, now you got to re-examine everything. And I think that a lot of people just are not comfortable doing that because everybody's life is pretty much built on this dynamics of white oppressed, black oppressed. And then it's just that blacks never had it. We couldn't do it. Whites always had it. They could, and it's just like this never-ending cycle of nonsense.
Mm-hmm. Somebody asked the question of, let's see. So Chad, was the goal to stop black progress, or were blacks just collateral damage? It's I would think it's more the latter. When it comes specific, it depends on who we're talking about. What was the interest of the federal government versus what was the interest of the Communist Party? The interest of the Communist Party was to stop black progress because they understood that to the extent that the Negro was establishing himself and mobilizing upward with free market principles, they had little use for the NAACP or the Communist Party. Because think about it, if I'm a black man in the 1920s and 30s and I own a shoe store, right, and I manufacture shoes, and I'm doing quite okay. I'm able to put my kids through school. I'm able to buy my own home, and I'm able to get along with my white neighbors and all the things. What use do I have of the NAACP? What use do I have of the communists?
Mm-hmm.
But if my business gets burned down, and if my home gets burned down, and I'm all of a sudden displaced, and I have nowhere else to turn to, and I see an article in the newspaper that says, "Join the Communist Party. Will protect you from white supremacy," I might be more inclined to do just that. When all along it was the communists who were burning these things down to begin with. And so, yes, the communists had an interest in stopping Black progress. But as far as the government is concerned, the government had an interest in expanding its own power. And so for the government, it's just a matter of collateral damage. Some heads are going to roll, and we're going to let these social justice movements do their thing. We're going to let them do their work. We're going to let them agitate, and we're going to swoop in at the right moment, because we know that our swooping in means legislation. We know that our swooping in means policies. We know our swooping in means, look, the free market can't work. Self-governance can't work. Allow us to implement these policies, and let's get back to normalcy. Let's bring order back. And now all of a sudden, the government is bigger today than it was 3 years ago. And so again, it depends on the entity you're asking about when you ask the question of, was it to stop Black progress, or was it just collateral damage? There were different interests involved, and when it comes to this story in particular, those interests just so happen to combine.
Hey guys, let me just, I didn't want to interrupt you, Chad. I was getting ready to hop off. Yeah, I gotta go, guys. I haven't eaten all day, and I gotta eat dinner. I'm like, man, I'm about to pass out over here, and so I'm gonna go ahead and hop off. But I'll be listening, and yeah, y'all have a good night. But again, guys, my good guy, President James Garfield. My bad, he was a Republican, but again, look into him. He was one of the first presidential womanizers. I mean, he was a sexual deviant, James Garfield. So look into that. It's a little interesting story there. But anyway, guys, I'll see you all next week, and I have fun. See y'all.
All right.
Take care.
Peace out.
All right, Blanche. So let's go ahead and get through these supers as we land the plane. We got one from Vic, gifted 5 memberships. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Got another one for Rick Hamstate, who says, best panel on the internet. One love to everyone in the chat. God bless. Thank you. Thank you for the $20. Really appreciate it. Got another one from Jesus Loves You. God bless the chat. Chad, Quisha, Blanche, and Chuck. Thank you. Oh, really? The MLK doc may be more important than UT2. I think it's all important. I think, to the extent that information gets out, it's super important. Apart from the MLK documentary that I'm releasing in April, there's other projects I'm going to be working on that's going to be just as important. One documentary that I'm going to work on is called The Myth of Blackness. And we're going to be talking about how Blackness, how it became a political identity and how it's used today. I know Blanche is going to be a part of that, so I'm excited about that. So yeah, be on the lookout. We have a lot of work to do. I got a phone call, strangely enough, from a very prominent rapper of all people, who is looking to help me get funding for some projects. So we're supposed to be having a meeting.
Wow. Is he like a hip hop or like a hip hop head rapper or?
Yeah, hip hop. But I mean, he's I don't think he's doing much rapping these days. I think he's focusing more on business interests.
Okay.
And so yeah, that was a pleasant surprise to get that phone call. Let's see here. What's that say?
Super I'm thinking it's Super Smoke.
Super Smoke gave us a super sticker. Thank you. Really appreciate the $10 super sticker. Rick
Somebody
Hampstead
said, is it Sexy Red?
No, it's not Sexy Red. Rick Hampstead gifted 10 memberships. Thank you. Where am I? Here I am. We have somebody else, Idra Singleton, who gifted 10 memberships. Thank y'all. I really appreciate that. Sir K, $7 Canadian. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Man, these names. CC 777, ICC 777, $2 super chat. The 3 isms: 1 big fruit salad, yum yum. Thank you. Let's see here. Dayon, Martin Luther, Lenin, deception must be exposed. 100%. Shout out to Atlanta. I know that's where Dayon is. Martin Towns, $3 super sticker. Thank you. Fred 10, Ifred 10, $5. God bless. Thank you. God bless you as well. DT, $10. Keep up the great work. Can't wait to see the upcoming documentary. Thank you. We're it's going to be a good one. I think it's going to be timeless. My hope is that it's played in schools. My hope is that homeschool educators use it as a resource, that private schools use it as a resource, that people use it to educate themselves, and that maybe even some bold public school teachers will use it as a resource. That's certainly my hope. Let's see here. I always lose my place. Here we go. I'm gonna let you take it from here because I can't read these names anymore.
All right. Miss Donna, life coach, best show tonight. Thank y'all. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
Miss Reed, he was the epitome of have you ever been swallowed? Have you ever been thank you, Miss Reed. Broski Bear, thank you for the super sticker.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Willie Doc.
Broski Bear in a minute. Thank you. Welcome back. I don't know if you've been watching. Yeah, go ahead.
Willie Doc, great show. Thanks for exposing the lies of MLK. For a future show, can you talk more about how the South may have pivoted away from slavery if the Civil War didn't occur?
Yeah, we'll talk about that, and we'll elaborate. I know we touch on it briefly in the documentary, but you're asking more for an elaboration on that because our shows typically run for about 3 hours. So yeah, that's not a bad idea.
Menelik, thank you. He says, forgive me if this was addressed earlier. I may have missed it. I saw Chuck earlier disagreeing with Roly-Poly Martin on the FBI suicide letter to MLK. What is the truth regarding that letter?
Yeah, so I don't mean to speak for Chuck, but from my understanding is that it wasn't actually written by the FBI or J. Edgar Hoover. But I'll let Chuck speak more to that. Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't.
I'll remember next week to have him elaborate on that. But from my understanding, it wasn't actually written by the FBI.
What? But think about it, you all. Why would the FBI tell them? It don't make no sense. Like, I don't know. It just sounds like a bliggity trick. I don't know. Alethea 846. Thank you for the super sticker. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I always thought that was weird. Like, kill yourself. I'm like, dude. Rick Hampstead, always a great show and great chat. Family, God loves you all. Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Tracy, thank you for the super sticker. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So yeah, when it comes to the Martin Luther King files, let me just reiterate that what we have access to right now was not released recently. It was information that's been out there for a while. These are files that we have access to, the ones that we referenced in the show earlier, is the files that were released some time ago, and we've always had access to. But there are more files and tapes. I don't know if the tapes are going to be released. It'll be interesting to see if those tapes are released, the recordings of the conversations and of the sexual escapades and the orgies. I don't know if the audio tapes are going to be released. I would be surprised if they were. But ideally, the files of Martin Luther King's communist connections, the circumstances surrounding his assassination, from my understanding, will be released. And the plan is that 45 days from the day that the executive order was signed by Trump is given for the government to come to Trump and come up with a plan to release those files. So I'm going to be paying attention to this. And originally my documentary is supposed to be released on January 20th, but we were unable to put the final touches on the documentary by January 20th. But I do think it was providential, because, a few days after January 20th, that's whenever Trump signed the executive order. And so hopefully those files are released before the release of my documentary, because it will give me more material to put into the documentary. So yeah.
DC Grace says, I read a few books about Thurgood Marshall the last few years, and I'm curious of you all's perspective on him in comparison to MLK.
Well, before he was a Supreme Court justice, he was an attorney for the NAACP. And his story is interesting because as a NAACP lawyer, he went undercover on a number of occasions in the South in order to do some agitation of his own. He along with I think Roy Wilkins, if I'm not mistaken. It was either Roy Wilkins or someone else early on. So, I mean, I don't know. Thurgood Marshall, I don't think he's some American hero either. Other than, his early days, I haven't done as much research on his jurisprudence as a Supreme Court justice. I know a lot of the decisions, a lot of the opinions, and that he had as a Supreme Court justice were not in keeping with American values. But yeah, I mean, if we're making comparisons, Thurgood Marshall to Martin Luther King, then from my understanding, Thurgood Marshall was more quote unquote upright. But at the end of the day, when it comes to some of the agitative efforts that he was involved in his early days as a member of the NAACP, to me, they are similar to Martin Luther King's agitative efforts in the civil rights movement. So yeah. What are your thoughts on Thurgood Marshall?
I mean, growing up, you think he's this, lawyer turned Supreme Justice, but I mean, to me, he's working on the same team. Though he just was the legal portion of, I guess, of what the movement was. I mean, he was, I guess, arguing the cases. Did he do the Brown versus Board of Education? Right, wasn't that him?
Yeah.
So I mean, again, yeah, to me they're on the same team. I mean, he might not be as a whoremonger as King, but what difference does it make if his ultimate goal is to essentially expand the role of the government? Now you got the government involved in the schools, forcing integration into schools. What was it? Separate but equal, or what was it? separate but equal.
Yeah, that's
And they were
TV Ferguson.
And they were arguing that it wasn't. I don't know. But I would just say that to me, all of these people are on the same team because their goal was to take America into a different direction. I mean, their goal wasn't to allow the common man and woman to make their own decisions. They want to do it by force. And like y'all said earlier, did you basically you said it eloquently, you said they have a credit card to expand the government. They can always point back and say, well, we've already set this precedent with King, so we can keep expanding upon it. LGBTQ rights, pretty soon they're gonna say you got to hire this person, you got to do this, you got to do that. It's too much. Even when Trump is out of office, they still going to keep doing the same thing. It's not going to stop.
Yeah, it's true. Looks like we got one more.
Yeah, it's two comments. One is MLK talking dirty on a wiretap is a nightmare fuel. I have a dream that you go swallow the king.
I shouldn't laugh at that, but it's funny. I mean,
it's out of foolishness. I have a dream.
I don't know why I keep thinking.
Your coffee needs more cream.
I saw a meme of it was Martin Luther King's face, and it says, "You're gonna be my Martin Luther Queen." I guess he was talking to one of his many women.
Brandon Smith says Bill Maher talked about the tapes years ago on Politically Incorrect. Apparently, during the sex with one of the white girls, he said, "I'm not a Negro tonight." Another
it's
one.
Not funny, but
all for interview by Jesse Lee Peterson would be cool. Oh, Jesse Lee, yeah.
Have you been on the Golden State?
Huh?
Have you been on Jesse's show?
No. I mean, I would love to go on his show, man. He's hilarious. Yeah, but I think it's just a hard pill to swallow, Chad. I don't know, man. I just think the way you are doing it in a documentary is a huge start, because if you have something that you can teach from, that somebody can put in front of people and they not immediately get offended, you kind of ease them into the, what his legacy actually is. And his legacy is actually bigger than him, because he was bigger dead than alive. Like, what he left behind is way bigger than the actual person. And like you mentioned, him being a whoremonger and philanderer. What's the word? Philanderer. Him being that is really pales into comparison as to what actually happened from his legacy. That's the expansion of the government.
Yeah.
And I don't think folks really care that he was a womanized. At this point, who cares? I mean,
yeah. So yeah, I pinned the link in the comment section for those of you who are interested in reading up on what the project is going to be about, as well as for those of you who are interested in contributing to the project.
Where is it? So I can pin it.
It's I think it's in the comment section on YouTube. Is it no longer pinned there? Yeah, it shows that it's still pinned on YouTube. Anyway, so yeah, if you want to read, I have a synopsis there, as well as again an opportunity for those of you who are interested in contributing. All of my work is independent. It's funny because Nicole Hannah-Jones, the author of the 1619 Project, she got into my comment section for one of my posts and basically tried to belittle me. She said, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about," because I use the word Confederate when referring to a newspaper article in 1872 where you see Southerners using this language of, and again, 1872. So mind you, this is 7 years after the end of the so-called Civil War. A South Carolina newspaper saying, surely a day will come when the men of South Carolina will be judged not by the color of their skin or their their speech, but rather by their conduct and their character. And so this kind of language was actually common in the South, contrary to this idea that the South just consisted of a lot of white supremacists and racists. No, there were many Southerners who believed in conduct and character over skin color, and how that note that Martin Luther King was, that line that Martin Luther King is famous for in his "I Have a Dream" speech was actually lifted from white Southerners. And so I said that these were, Confederate thinkers. And to that, Nicole Hannah-Jones got in my comment section and said, "You don't know what you're talking about, that they weren't Confederate because the war ended in 1863 or what have you." And I responded to her. And anyway, you can go back and look at that exchange. But I told her in my response to her that, you're just you are literally paid to literarily rub salt into old race wounds. Like, you're commodifying on half-truths for the purpose of keeping divisions alive. Like, that's literally your job. To which she responded that she told me that I'm telling half-truths for cash because I have a Venmo account. To which I responded to her, well, who funds the 1619 Project? Like, if you're telling me that I have a Venmo account and I'm only doing this for cash, my question then is, well, who funds the 1619 Project? Because the 1619 Project is some of the most revisionist history in the past decade, right? So literally, she's being paid to keep division alive. She's being paid to center race. This is the actual written language of the New York Times, to center race and slavery at the center of the American conversation. So that's what she's paid to do, right? And my thing was, what I told her was, well, I have a Venmo account because all of my work is independent, meaning real people who are genuinely interested in history are funding the history they want to see told. Like, they are funding this effort toward telling the truth, and that allows me to be independent. That allows me to let the facts be the facts. And so, like, my agenda is for the truth to get out. What is your agenda? Well, your agenda is, once again, to make race and slavery the center of the American conversation. Why? Because you get political and social clout from doing this. You have a desire to Sovietize America. That's what your desire is. And I told her, like, look, you're trying to advance Marxism. And you'll notice if you watch the exchange between she and I, that she didn't deny that. She just jumped to, oh, you have a Venmo account. And so yes, I do have a Venmo account. Yes, I am raising money for this project because it's an independent project and it costs money to make it. It costs money to be able to use sources and to use B-roll and to use all the other things that it takes to make a movie. All right. I mean, I can make a film, but I'm not a Hollywood studio. I'm just a person with a family. And so, yes, it takes money. I mean, sue me. Like, it takes money to make work like this, to make these kind of projects, to produce these kind of things. And my whole thing is, if Hollywood's not going to do it, if all of your favorite directors and producers aren't going to do it, somebody has to do it. And yeah, it takes money to make these projects. So I don't apologize for that. I've never been one to ask for money. Never, ever have I been one to ask for money. But when it comes to like, I believe that if you're going to engage in a transaction, you have to have something of substance that you are exchanging for that, in that transaction. And so the product is the film. The product, whenever Blanche uses his time to go and do his live streams is the information that he's sharing, is the insight that he's sharing, right? And as much as we care about the truth, as much as we want to get the information out, internet costs money. The ability to put films together costs money. You know, these things cost money, right? And so, yeah, I want to tell the truth, whether it's me in a room full of 10 people at, you know, in my local town, because I think it's important to get out, or I'm going to use a platform like this and my website and other things to try to get it out to a larger number of people. And the larger the crowd, the more money it costs. But I'm so dedicated to telling the truth that I don't mind telling it to 10 people in a room. So this whole idea of, oh, you're a grifter because you have a Venmo account. I mean, I still don't know what this term grifter means. I mean, like, how do you distinguish someone who is lying to get money versus someone who is telling the truth and it just so happens to cost money to get it on the platforms? So someone educate me on that. But again, I regret that I spent this much time even talking about it. But I think it needs to be understood that when you have someone like a Nicole Hannah-Jones, who's backed by the Pulitzer Center and the New York Times and all of these interests or entities that have an interest in keeping divisions alive, they get to put out their product and nobody questions where the money came from. Nobody questions what are the interests of these entities. It just kind of appeared on your screen one day and you were interested in it, so you clicked on it, versus like the kind of things that I'm doing in terms of getting the truth out. People have a front row seat to the making or the progress of how the butter is churned. And because of that, oh, you're a grifter. Okay. So I guess Nicole Hannah-Jones isn't a grifter. Gotcha. Because her money is dark. Understood. Noted.
Well, and you know what's crazy is the stuff that, so what you're doing with this project is not a widely accepted message. And when she's very ignorant, because what you're saying is not going to be accepted by either side. If she wants to play the game that you're getting paid for this, who would be paying you? The majority of conservatives and Republicans think that MLK is this figure. The majority of Democrats and liberals think that MLK is this figure. Most people agree that MLK was this person. So you coming in with information like this goes against the majority of people out there on both sides. So for her to think you were being paid, who would be paying you? What person would be paying you to go against something that everybody believes is a pivotal figure in American history and seen as a good person? You're going against the literal grain, like literally you're going against both sides. So to me, this term grifter is just used to discredit someone. It's to make you believe that the person's only saying this because they're getting paid. But what they're telling the truth. Is that grifting? Is there a truth grift? I mean, what is grifting if you're telling the truth? Anyway, so it would be different if you were getting funded by some private sources and they said we wanted to, spread misinformation. But that's not the case, because you would have a Venmo. You have a Venmo because the powers that be aren't funding you. So the fact you have a Venmo gives credibility to that people that are watching you and tuning in are the ones that are paying, not some big corporation or some conglomerate. It's regular everyday people paying your Venmo. So Black people don't really think their thoughts through because it's all emotional and racial babble. So she didn't think about the fact that you have a Venmo means you're getting paid by the common man and woman. You're not getting paid by a major corporation. Her, on the other hand, no telling who she's getting paid from. She probably got a check signed by Kamala herself. So again, she's just trying to discredit you because she knows that you're telling the truth. These people know. They know. They know that you are well-read. They know that Chuck is well-read. They know these things, and so they can only attack you. Think about what she said. You're a grifter. Just pick. Oh, Leatherface said, oh, you're wearing a hat. Oh, you live in Texas. Just say anything to just make you seem, non-credible. But yeah, she's foolish. and I saw her husband. I know he's broke back. I don't know how these man. Listen, yeah, I don't know, man. These dudes. Jerome B gave a super sticker. Said pro truth is bigger than pro black. It is. Amen.
100%.
And Gregatron, I look forward to seeing your new project. Thank you, Gregatron.
Thank you.
Not to be confused with Gagatron.
Well, I think that wraps it up. Do you have any closing remarks? Are you you're going to be on the lookout for this this file, or are you?
I'm not going to listen. I know that what you guys share is probably going to be a lot more than what they share on these release files. They're going to pick and choose what they release. They're not going to just say, set it on the table and say, y'all read through it, because it would cause too much chaos and confusion. It'd be too much. I think they're going to just let us see, I don't know, everything involving the assassination, see who was involved in that. And I think that'll probably be about the end of it. They're not going to release the truth of what he really did, but it's just good that you and Chuck bringing out books that show how the left is almost bragging about how out of control King was. Like they're writing about it, like they're almost throwing it in your face. Like, this is the guy that you all are following, and you can't touch him. He's untouchable.
Well, the narrative that they have is Martin Luther King was on his way to bringing people together and helping the poor and basically making America this kind of utopia, and how the government didn't like that. The government didn't like that he was bringing peace, so they killed him. Like, that's the narrative that people have. So
it's a dumb narrative, because the government was trying to make a utopia. Literally, they were trying to cure race relations. They were trying to feed the poor, clothe them. Like the government literally trying to make a utopia. So why wouldn't they want a person doing the same? They don't make any sense. Like, people don't think their thought. They just say dumb stuff because they just want to be conspiracy theorists, and it's just dumb. Like, I don't know. People's brains are going to be, I don't know. I look forward to your document. I look forward to what you're putting out more than the files. How about that? I look forward to what you're going to do versus the files, because at least I know what you're going to put out is going to be well researched and well thought out, and it will actually have a purpose behind it, not just to sensationalize some files and documents. It's actually a reason behind, a method to the madness, not to cure the appetite of some ignorant people that want to believe in every conspiracy that comes across the social media.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll leave it there. When are you on live again next?
Probably Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Okay.
I think I'm going to pick back up on doing live streams during the week. I know I've been off for about a month and a half or so because I've been working on this documentary.
Well, if you are, let me know which days, because I used to go Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go, I used to do like Tuesdays and Thursdays, I think. So if you want to go back to those days, just let me know what days you want to do, because I'll do.
Okay.
That. Yeah.
And by the way, so once I'm done with the documentary, I'm going to be having 2 live showings, in-person showings, one in Atlanta and another in Dallas. And that will be in April, maybe the 1st of May. I mean, the documentary will 100% be done by April. There's no question about that. But I do want to do a live in-person viewing. I know that the one in Atlanta is going to cost money for tickets, but the one in Dallas is going to be free for everybody who's contributed to the documentary. I want to do that as a special thank you. So I'm telling people now, so that way if you have contributed and you want to have an opportunity to come and have a in-person viewing experience and meet me, then that will be available for you all in Dallas. So save the date, even though I don't know the exact date, but like I said, it will be sometime late April that I'll be hosting that, and then it will be free for everybody else online. I haven't decided whether I'm going to be releasing it digitally through my website or on YouTube. I know on YouTube, there's always a threat of it being pulled down, whereas if I put it on my website, I have control over that, and nobody can come and try to pull it down. So anyway,
to be clear, April, Atlanta, May, Dallas.
If I have the documentary done at the in the early weeks of April, then both dates will be mid to late April. However, if I have the documentary done in mid-April, then the one in Atlanta will be in April, and the one in Dallas will be in May. So, all right. Okay. And I know Vince Everett Ellison is going to be at the one in Atlanta. Hopefully I can get Chuck to come out as well.
Is he here?
Vince Everett Ellison is in Virginia.
Okay.
But his manager, April Chapman, is in Atlanta.
Okay, yeah.
And I know Sub-Zero is in Atlanta as well. There's a lot of folks in Atlanta. I know you're in Atlanta. I know Dayon is in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And Atlanta is the perfect place to host something like this, right?
It is.
It will be a kind of homecoming of sorts. So what a mess. All righty. Looks like we got something from Deontay Blade Ford. Chad is a threat to the black bourgeoisie. He's organically garnering an audience and galvanizing blacks to reject the status quo. I mean, at least that's the attempt. At least that's the old college try. So yeah. You think you'd come out to something like that, Blanche?
Oh, definitely. I would like to go to both of them. You know, Dallas and obviously here because I'm here, but you know, Dallas as well though.
Somebody said well, I guess this is a super, so I'll pull it up on the screen. I want the DVD like Uncle Tom 1 and 2. I haven't actually thought about doing DVDs. That's actually a really good idea. I need to find out how to do that. How to again, I'm 100% independent, so I just need to figure out how to distribute through.
Do they still do DVDs? I thought it was all.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. I mean, the thing is like, and it makes sense. Like, I don't knock it. I really don't knock it because when
you have a hard copy.
Yeah, to have a hard copy, it's the same with books. Like, I have a lot of books, and sure, someone could argue, well, why not just get ebooks, or why not, you know?
You got to have the books. Yeah,
you have to have a hard copy because it's like, when you consider the direction we're going as far as the technocracy.
Yeah.
And I mean, you see already what they're doing in China in terms of limiting people's access to the truth. We're not too far off from that here in the United States. So the idea of having an actual hard copy of information like this, I totally get it. And plus for me, like, I'm a collector. Like, I collect vinyl records. I have a record player. We enjoy playing jazz records around the house. And other genres as well. We enjoy, we as a family are a reading family. We read physical books in our household. DVDs, I mean, we don't really watch a lot of TV, so I don't have a lot of DVDs. But and I'm not much of a movie buff to begin with, which might be strange for some of you to believe, as someone who myself am a filmmaker. But, you know, I totally get the whole concept of having physical DVDs. That makes perfect sense. Looks like we said that Super's coming through.
Would you ever mind doing a deep dive on Tupac 2? This is from Maurice.
Do you think that's worth putting the time into, Blanche? Because the thing is like as popular as a rapper Tupac is, I wonder if I mean, because Martin Luther King makes sense because of the fact that he's nationally, internationally quoted and cited and beloved by the world. Whereas Tupac, I mean, he's there's no question that he's so popular in the hip hop community, but outside the hip hop community, I don't know that.
Well, I'll say this: Tupac is seen as a, you know, as a revolutionary, as a like he's seen in the same light as fighting for social justice. I mean, he's viewed that way. I would venture to say that people probably know Tupac more for him being, you know, I guess an activist in his music. I don't know, but I think does it make sense? I don't know. The guy mentioned Maurice that he is one of the sacred cows of Black culture. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much.
I will, Maurice. I'll ponder that. I'll ponder that. Like I said, I mean, with the company that I'm starting, it's called Historia Revelata, and the whole idea behind this company will be to do deep dives and to tell the parts of history that the bought and paid for quote unquote historians don't touch because they have an interest in securing power for the government. So that will be the purpose of the company, and most importantly, it will be to tell the truth, and in the spirit of, you know, in the spirit of, you know, as a Christian, as a believer, I know that all truth is God's truth, and I know that you know, when it comes to knowledge. When we lack knowledge, when we lack understanding, we suffer. And we suffer at the hands of demagogues, of despots, of tyrants, of ideologues. You know, the Bible talks about how we are not to be taken captive by hollow and deceptive philosophies. And when it comes to our inclination as human beings to fall for what sounds good, we tend to do that when we lack principle, right? And I feel that the more the truth gets out, the more we can hone principle, the more that we can ground ourselves in the one truth, the one true truth, which is God Himself. And so we're constantly being lied to, and those lies are used as tools to get us to go in a direction that these sinister people wish us to go. I think of it in the same vein as, you know, shepherding, quite frankly. I mean, when you have a field full of sheep, you know, there's various methods. Those of you who are farmers or, you know, who are into that sort of thing might know where I'm going with this, but there's various methods that are used to get the sheep to go in the direction the shepherd wishes to take them, whether they use dogs or whatever the case may be. And a good shepherd leads his sheep to don't lead his sheep astray, whereas, you know, the bad shepherd leads them to their own slaughter. So we are being led to the slaughter because of the methods that are being used to get us to go in that direction. And the methods is miseducation. The method is lies and mythology. There are various methods that are used, and when it comes to those lies, what matters most is not necessarily the deception. What matters most is the emotions of the people. The emotions of the people does more to secure that lie than the methods that cause the emotion to begin with. You have people who are emotionally invested in Martin Luther King being real. You have people who are emotionally invested in the civil rights movement being this high point for America and bringing people together. You have people who are emotionally invested in this notion that if Kamala Harris would have won, it would have been a great step forward for America to elect its first woman president. Never mind the fact that she would have destroyed this country faster in 4 years than this downward trajectory that we've been going in for the last 50 years. When you can emote people to go against their own best interests, that's pretty much all you need. And after that, to the extent that people like myself and Blanche come along to expose the truth, the government doesn't have to do anything. They just sit back and let the people who are emotionally involved do the work for them. How dare you talk about Martin Luther King? What do you stand to gain? Like the emotions is what makes it real, right? The emotions of the people is what makes Martin Luther King real, is what makes the civil rights movement true. That's all they need. So again, the whole point of the company that I'm starting and the work that other folks are doing, we understand isn't going to change things overnight, but it will at least be a resource in the rearing and the education of children that they might then hope to go along a different trajectory than what my generation has been brought up with.
We have a super sticker. Thank you, Chad. You are literally changing that our downtrodden loser, low caste identity, one documentary at a time. Thank you, Stephen Carter. Brown Eyes. Will you be including Aretha Franklin in the documentary? She's been asking about Aretha all night.
What was Aretha Franklin's dad's name?
Oh, he was a pastor,
right?
Yeah.
And I know he was involved in the movement.
Didn't he father two of her first two children? That was the rumor. It was he was the father. He fathered her first. She had a child at 14 and 15.
By her father.
Yeah, that pastor. It's rumored that he was the one that was the father of her two children. They never found out who the dad was.
C.L. Franklin, right? Minister C.L. Franklin, the Reverend C.L. Franklin. Is that the same guy?
I'm about to look it up right now. American minister and civil rights actor. Yeah, that's him.
Okay,
that's him.
I mean, the civil rights movement was just one big cesspool.
Yeah,
is really what it was. Just a musty cesspool. Alrighty. All right, I gotta jump on a phone call.
All right, Chuck said he did 4 hours worth of info on the Shakurs. So he probably covered like all of them. His mother, his aunt, his father. He probably did a whole family breakdown on the Shakurs.
Well, there you go.
Dayon said rumor never confirmed. She disclosed who the father was. It wasn't her pops. I don't know. I don't trust him. I'm sorry. I gotta. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I got to jump on a phone call. Thank you all for hanging with us tonight. Like I said, be on the lookout for that documentary. This should be an interesting year. Trump's first year back in office. So far, there's a lot of things that he has done that I'm not okay with. There's some things that he's done that I think is pretty cool. But that's any administration. He was better than the alternative. And the thing is, what you're going to get with me and what you're going to get with this show is that we're going to be pretty even-handed in the way that we cover things and the way that we talk about things. We're not going to be 100% sold out for Trump or sold out for Republicans. That's not what you're going to get. Because again, we believe Christ is king. We believe that truth matters. We believe that integrity matters. I was watching a live stream of Blanche that he did, I think earlier today or yesterday, where he was talking about the Bevel and Beatty situation, I think is her name, as well as this Mike, what's his name? Mike Jenkins situation. when it came to the whole Mike Jenkins situation and Michelle Bishop, he acknowledged where Michelle Bishop was wrong for lying, but he also acknowledged how the guy Mike Jenkins is basically using this as an opportunity for clout and for, he's basically riding this wave of just this pathetic, weak image that we get of the so-called black man, thanks to the civil rights movement. He's riding that wave. We saw Al Sharpton do it. We saw Jesse Jackson do it, where they exploit and take advantage of opportunities and situations to line their own pockets and to get rich off of this fake notion of racism. And so again, for me, like when it comes to these kind of cult of personality, like galvanizing a group behind, I don't care if it's Trump or Biden or Obama, you're not going to get that over here. We want to tell the truth as far as we know it, and push the agenda of the advancing of God's kingdom, not the advancing of the Republican Party, not the advancing of the Democrat Party, not the advancing of any quote unquote party, but the advancing of truth. And we believe that to the extent that we as adults acknowledge the truth and live according to the truth and strive to live lives of integrity, that's how you get healing. That's how you resolve relations and things of this nature. To the extent that we have the disposition of forgiveness, to the extent that we have the disposition of just being honorable men and virtuous women, I mean, we're never going to reach perfection on this side of heaven. But we are conducting ourselves in such a way that we are living on earth as it is in heaven, and that's the best we can hope for. And Jesus is the perfect example. He's our intercessor. He's the perfect picture of how we ought to live. And so I'm not going to distract from that by singing the praises of a politician just because he has an R in front of his name.
Right.
So anyway, I think we'll leave it there. You pulled something up on the screen?
Yeah, Chuck was the title of his show was called The Marxist Origins of Hip Hop. It's on Sub-Zero's channel. That's Sub-Zero 3639 on YouTube. And he said it's 2-part. So if y'all want to check that out, The Marxist Origins of Hip Hop on Sub-Zero's channel, that's Sub-Zero 3639 on YouTube.
Cool. All right. Love you all. Have a blessed night. Have a great week. Take care.